The schoolhouse smelled of chalk dust and desperation. Abigail Cross stood at the window watching the last of her students disappear down the rutted dirt road. 8 years old, the Hendricks boy. His boots were held together with wire and hope. She'd given him her lunch again, the third time that week, and her stomach gnawed at itself in protest. 33 years old, unmarried, unremarkable. The words followed her like a shadow, whispered in the mercantile, murmured over Sunday dinners she wasn't invited to. In Boston, she might have been a spinster with prospects. A modern woman, independent, educated. Here on the Wyoming plains, she was simply unfinished business. A woman who'd missed her moment. She locked the schoolhouse door and started the walk home, if the cramped room above the general store could be called that. The wind cut through her shawl like it had a personal grudge. November was settling in hard, and winter in Wyoming didn't negotiate. Her room was exactly as she'd left it. Neat, cold, and profoundly empty. A narrow bed, a washstand. 3 dresses hanging on pegs like accusations. The window overlooked the street, which was currently empty except for a stray dog and someone's forgotten hat tumbling in the wind. She lit the stove with the last of her kindling and sat down to review her accounts. The numbers didn't improve with staring. $16.30. That's what stood between her and the street when the school board decided they couldn't afford her anymore. Which they would, eventually. They always did. Schools out here opened and closed like flowers. Brief, hopeful, and ultimately crushed by the reality of empty coffers and emptier futures. The knock came just as the sun bled out across the horizon. Abigail frowned. No one visited her. She was respected, certainly. Parents nodded, shopkeepers were polite. But respect and friendship were different currencies, and she was bankrupt in the latter. She opened the door to find a man she recognized but didn't know. Cole Maddox stood in the hallway looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that suggested smiling would crack it. She'd seen him in town exactly 3 times in 2 years. Always alone, always purposeful, always gone before anyone could engage him in the kind of meaningless conversation that passed for community here. "Miss Cross." His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Mr. Maddox." She didn't invite him in. Propriety was one of the few things she still had. "I need to speak with you. It's business." Business. The word hung between them like a challenge. She should have closed the door, should have cited propriety, the hour, the complete impropriety of a single man visiting a single woman's room. Instead, she heard herself say, "You have 5 minutes." He stepped inside and the room immediately felt smaller. He didn't sit, didn't remove his hat, didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I need a wife." The words hit her like a slap. "Excuse me?" "A wife," he repeated, as if she might not have understood the English. "I'm not asking you to—" He stopped, jaw working. "This isn't a romantic proposal. It's practical." Abigail stared at him. In novels, this was where the heroine would swoon or blush or do something charmingly feminine. She felt none of those things. Mostly, she felt tired. "Why me?" "You're educated, independent. You don't seem the type to have illusions about marriage." He said it like he was listing the qualities of a good horse. "And you need security." "How presumptuous of you to— You're about to lose this room. The landlord's already told half the town he's renting it to the new surveyor come spring. Your teaching salary barely covers food, let alone rent and fuel." He wasn't gloating, just stating facts. "Winter's coming. You won't survive it alone." The truth of it burned worse than the cold. "And what exactly do you get from this arrangement?" Her voice was sharper than she intended. "Legitimacy, a stakes in the community. The kind of stability that comes with a family, even a manufactured one." He met her eyes directly. "There's a man, Victor Hale, who's been trying to push me off my land for years. Lone ranchers are easy targets. Married men with families are harder to dislodge. So I'm a shield. We both are." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "I had a contract drawn up. Separate rooms. Mutual respect. You keep teaching if you want or manage the household. Your choice. I provide housing, food, security. If either of us wants out after a year, we dissolve it quietly. No questions." She should have thrown him out, should have been insulted, outraged, scandalized. Instead, she took the paper. The contract was surprisingly thorough, clinical even. It read less like a marriage proposal and more like a business merger, which she supposed it was. There was even a clause about asset division should the arrangement end. "I need an answer by tomorrow," Cole said. "Hale's making moves. I can't wait." "Tomorrow?" "I'm not asking you to love me, Miss Cross. I'm asking you to survive. There are worse foundations for a marriage." He left without another word, and Abigail stood in the silence holding a contract that would change everything. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat by the window watching the stars wheel overhead, thinking about the path that had led her here. Boston, the engagement, James with his easy smile and easier lies. She'd been 25 when she discovered he was already married, had been for 3 years, with 2 children he'd never mentioned. The scandal had been exquisite, whispered about in parlors, dissected over tea. Poor Abigail Cross, so desperate to marry she hadn't seen the obvious signs. The university where she'd taught let her go quietly. Her family suggested she might be more comfortable elsewhere. Elsewhere had turned out to be Wyoming. The frontier, they said, was more forgiving. They'd been wrong about that, but she'd been too proud to go back. 8 years. 8 years of teaching other people's children, eating alone, saving money that evaporated like morning dew. 8 years of proving she didn't need anyone. And now this. A marriage of convenience to a man she didn't know. For the sake of survival, she was too stubborn to admit she needed. The knock came at dawn. This time, it was gentle, almost apologetic. Abigail opened the door already knowing what she would say, knowing and hating herself a little for it. Cole Maddox stood there with a minister. "I brought Reverend Walsh," Cole said, "in case you wanted this settled quickly. But if you need more time, no." The word came out stronger than she felt. "I don't need more time." The ceremony lasted 7 minutes. Reverend Walsh, bless him, tried to inject some warmth into the proceedings. He talked about partnership, about building a life together, about the sacred bonds of matrimony. Cole looked like he was enduring a tooth extraction. Abigail felt oddly detached, as if she were watching someone else make this catastrophic decision. "Do you, Cole Maddox, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Abigail Cross, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" She thought about her empty room, her dwindling savings, the winter coming down like a hammer. "I do." The Reverend pronounced them married with obvious relief. Cole paid him, thanked him, and ushered him out with the efficiency of a man completing a transaction. Then they were alone. "I have a wagon outside," Cole said, "for your things." Her things. 2 trunks, a hat box, and a life's worth of carefully maintained dignity. The ride to the ranch took 3 hours. Neither of them spoke much. What was there to say? They just entered into what might be the most honest marriage in Wyoming. No love, no illusions, just 2 people making a calculated gamble against the odds. The ranch, when it finally appeared on the horizon, was bigger than she'd expected. A sprawling house, weathered but solid. Barns, corrals, outbuildings arranged with military precision. Land that stretched until it hit sky. "How much of this is yours?" she asked. 2,000 acres, give or take." He pulled the wagon to a stop. "Most of it's grazing land. I run cattle, some horses. Had help until last spring." "What happened last spring?" "They left." He didn't elaborate. The house was clean but austere. Functional furniture, minimal decoration, a kitchen that showed signs of use by someone who cooked out of necessity, not pleasure. A sitting room with a fireplace large enough to roast a pig. "Your room's upstairs," Cole said, already carrying her trunk. "Second door on the right. Mine's at the end of the hall. There's a lock on your door, if you want it." The room was surprisingly spacious. A real bed, not a cot. A wardrobe, a dresser, a chair by the window. The window itself overlooked the western pasture, where cattle moved like dark water against the grass. "I'll let you settle in," Cole said from the doorway. "Dinner's at 6, nothing fancy." He was gone before she could respond. Abigail sat on the bed, her bed, in her room, in a house she now legally shared with a stranger, and tried to process what she'd just done. She'd married him. Actually married him. A laugh bubbled up, slightly hysterical. This morning she'd been Miss Cross, respected schoolteacher. Now she was Mrs. Maddox, wife to a man she'd spoken to for maybe 20 minutes total. The laugh died quickly. She unpacked methodically, hanging dresses in the wardrobe, arranging her few books on the dresser, placing her mother's photograph beside the bed. Small acts of domesticity that felt like lies. Dinner was beef stew and silence. Cole served generous portions and ate like a man used to solitude. Abigail picked at her food, hyper-aware of every sound, the scrape of spoons, the tick of the clock, the wind testing the windows. "The school," she said finally. "I'd like to continue teaching." "Fine. I'll need the wagon twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. Take it whenever you need it." More silence. "Is there anything you need me to do?" The question felt absurd. "Here, around the ranch." Cole looked at her like he was reassessing. "Can you shoot? A gun?" That would be the implication, yes. "I've never. I'll teach you." Not an offer, a statement. Winter here isn't just cold, it's dangerous. Wolves, sometimes worse. You need to be able to defend yourself. The thought of holding a weapon, of potentially using it, made her stomach turn, but she nodded. "Tomorrow then," Cole said. "After breakfast." The meal ended. Cole cleared the dishes, didn't ask her to, just did it, and disappeared into what she'd learned was his study. Abigail retreated to her room and locked the door. The first week passed in awkward adjustments. Cole rose before dawn, worked until dark, spoke in sentences that rarely exceeded 5 words. Abigail tried to establish routines, cooking breakfast, managing the house, preparing lessons for the school days she still maintained. They orbited each other like planets, sharing space but never truly connecting. The shooting lessons were brutal. Cole handed her a rifle the first morning, showed her how to load it, and pointed at a fence post 50 yards out. "Hit that." She missed, repeatedly. The recoil bruised her shoulder. The noise made her ears ring. Cole watched without comment, occasionally adjusting her stance, her grip, her breathing. Again. By the end of the first week, she could hit the post. By the end of the second, she could hit it consistently. "Good enough," Cole said, which she'd learned was high praise. The town noticed, of course. News of their marriage spread like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson from the Mercantile couldn't hide her shock. "So sudden," she kept repeating, like Abigail might not have noticed. The other women regarded her with a mixture of envy and suspicion. How had the spinster schoolteacher landed Cole Maddox? If they only knew the truth. It was during her 3rd week as Mrs. Maddox that Victor Hale made his first appearance. Abigail was in the garden. Calling it a garden was generous. It was more of a struggling vegetable patch, when a rider appeared on the southern ridge. Not Cole. She'd learned to recognize his silhouette, his way of sitting a horse. This man rode like he owned the world. He was older than Cole, maybe 45, with silver threading his dark hair and clothes too fine for ranch work. He dismounted with theatrical grace and removed his hat. "Mrs. Maddox, I presume." His voice was smooth, educated. "Victor Hale, I own the land adjacent to your husband's property." The pause before husband was deliberate. "Mr. Hale." She didn't offer her hand. "I wanted to extend my congratulations on your marriage. Quite the surprise to everyone in the county." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Cole's been a bachelor for so long, we'd all given up hope." "How kind of you to visit." "I also wanted to welcome you personally. The frontier can be isolating for a woman of culture. I host a dinner every month, the educated class, such as it is out here. I'd be delighted if you and Cole would attend." It was a test. She could see it in the way he watched her, measuring her response. "I'll discuss it with my husband." "Of course." He replaced his hat. "I'll send a formal invitation. It really would be a shame for you to miss it. We have so few opportunities for civilized conversation out here." He left trailing implications like breadcrumbs. Cole found her still standing in the garden 20 minutes later. What did he want? "To congratulate us. And invite us to dinner." Cole's expression darkened. "We're not going." "He knows." "Knows what?" "That this isn't real." She met his eyes. "Maybe not the details, but he suspects. The way he talked, the way he looked at me. He's testing for weaknesses." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "Hale's been trying to buy this land for 5 years. My father refused to sell. After he died, Hale assumed I'd fold. When I didn't, he started looking for leverage." "What kind of leverage?" "Legal challenges, property disputes. He's claimed water rights, grazing rights, tried to prove my deed was fraudulent." Cole's jaw tightened. "He's careful. Always just inside the law, always with witnesses and documentation. But he's patient. He'll wait for a crack, then drive a wedge through it. And our marriage is a crack. Not if we make it convincing. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. That night, they had their first real conversation. It happened almost by accident. Abigail came downstairs for water and found Cole in the sitting room reading by lamplight. Not ranch accounts or legal documents, an actual book, Dickens, unless she was mistaken. "You read," she said, then immediately felt foolish. Of course he read. "My mother was a teacher, before." He didn't explain before what. "She believed in education, made my father build a library." "May I see it?" He looked surprised, but stood, leading her to a room she hadn't yet entered. Floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with volumes. Literature, history, science. More books than some town libraries. "This is remarkable," she breathed, running her fingers along the spines. "I never expected—" "Expected what? That a rancher might value books?" There was an edge to his voice. "No, most of the men here aren't me." He said it simply, without arrogance. "I'm not most men." She pulled out a volume, Emily Bronte. "Have you read this?" "Twice." "You?" "3 times." The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. They talked about books until midnight, about characters and themes, about the difference between Dickens and Austen, about whether the Bronte sisters had truly understood passion or merely imagined it. Cole was surprisingly well read, his opinions sharp and well defended. Abigail found herself arguing with genuine enthusiasm for the first time in years. When she finally went to bed, she felt something unfamiliar. Interest. Not romantic interest, she wasn't that foolish, but intellectual curiosity, the sense that there might be more to Cole Maddox than a convenient solution to her problems. The following weeks established new patterns. They still maintained separate rooms, separate lives in many ways, but small intimacies crept in. Coffee shared in the morning quiet. Books exchanged with minimal comment but maximum thought. Abigail began improving the house, not redecorating but adding touches. Curtains for the harsh morning sun, herbs drying in the kitchen, a tablecloth that made dinner feel less like a transaction. Cole, in turn, made concessions. He started talking more, explaining the ranch operations, asking her opinion on matters he could have decided himself. When a fence needed repair, he showed her how to mend it. When supplies needed ordering, he had her review the list. "You might need to know this," he'd say, "if something happens to me." She hated how practical it was, and how much sense it made. December arrived with the first snow. Abigail woke to a world transformed, white and silent and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. She found Cole already outside, securing the barn against the storm. "We'll be snowed in for a few days," he said when he came in, stomping ice from his boots. "I stocked supplies last week. We'll be fine." Fine turned out to be an understatement. Trapped together by the weather, they couldn't maintain their careful distance. Cole taught her to play chess, and she taught him to make proper tea. They read aloud to each other in the evenings, taking turns with chapters. They argued about politics, about philosophy, about whether Shakespeare's comedies were actually funny. On the third night, Abigail made a mistake. She asked about his father. Cole's expression shuddered immediately. "That's not relevant. I'm your wife. Legally, if not—" "Exactly. Legally. The contract didn't include my history. I'm not trying to pry. I just thought Don't." He stood abruptly. "We have an arrangement. It works because we maintain boundaries. Don't confuse proximity with intimacy." He left her sitting there, feeling slapped. But the next morning, he left a book on her door handle, a collection of poems. Inside the front cover, in careful handwriting, "I'm sorry." She didn't mention it. Neither did he. But that evening, he stayed for tea after dinner. "My father," he said suddenly, staring into his cup, "was not a good man. He built this ranch through methods I'm not proud of. When he died, I inherited not just the land but his enemies, his debts, his sins." "What kind of sins?" "The kind that don't wash off." He looked at her. "Victor Hale hates me because my father destroyed his father. Legally, financially, and eventually, literally. The elder Hale drank himself to death after losing everything to my father in a property dispute. Victor spent 20 years planning his revenge. Abigail absorbed this. So our marriage makes it harder for him to claim I'm a temporary obstacle. Families have legacy. Bachelors are just obstacles to be removed. Have you told the law? The law? Cole laughed bitterly. The sheriff's in Hale's pocket. The judge owes him money. Out here, the law is whatever Hale says it is. Then why stay? Why not sell, move somewhere? Because this is mine. The ferocity in his voice surprised her. Not my father's. Mine. I've spent 8 years trying to do it right, to build something that isn't tainted by what he did. I won't let Hale take that. I won't let him win. It was the most he'd ever told her, the most he'd ever revealed. Abigail reached across the table and placed her hand over his. He stared at it like she'd placed a snake there. Cole, we're in this together. That was the agreement. The agreement was practical. And this is practical. She squeezed his hand. If Hale is as dangerous as you say, I need to know everything, all of it, so I can help. You shouldn't have to, but I do. Because like it or not, his fight with you is now his fight with us. Something shifted in his expression. Not softening, Cole didn't soften, but acknowledgement, maybe. Acceptance. There's something else, he said. Documents. My father kept records. Every deal, every transaction. I found them after he died, locked in his study. If Hale ever found them, where are they? Buried, hidden. He met her eyes. Only I know where. If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you. If it does, he continued, there's a map. In my desk, false bottom, left drawer. The documents prove everything. Hale's father's claim was legitimate. My father stole it through fraud. If those papers surface, I lose everything. Then why keep them? Because someday, I want to make it right. Pay back what was stolen, or at least acknowledge it. But not yet. Not while Hale's alive and hunting for ammunition. It was trust, Abigail realized. Fragile and conditional, but real. She thought about James, who'd hidden a wife and children, about promises that had turned to ash. I won't betray you, she said. I know. He pulled his hand away gently. That's why I married you. Christmas came quietly. Abigail had never been one for elaborate celebrations, but she tried. A small tree from the woods decorated with paper ornaments. A special dinner, roast chicken instead of stew. She'd even found a gift, a new journal, leather-bound, for his ranch records. Cole seemed genuinely surprised. You didn't have to. I wanted to. He disappeared and returned with a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a set of watercolors and fine paper. I noticed you looking at the art supplies in town. Thought you might. She hadn't painted in 8 years. Not since Boston, since the scandal, since she'd decided that creative frivolities were luxuries she couldn't afford. Thank you, she managed, throat tight. They spent the evening by the fire. Abigail attempted a landscape while Cole pretended to work on his accounts, but mostly watched her paint. It was domestic and strange and oddly comfortable. You're good at that, he said. I'm rusty. Still good. She looked at him, really looked. At the strong jaw and serious eyes and the way the firelight softened his harsh features. At the man who'd proposed a marriage of convenience and then gave her back pieces of herself she'd forgotten. Cole? The knock at the door shattered the moment. Cole was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the rifle above the fireplace. Stay here. But Abigail followed anyway, instinct overriding caution. The man at the door was one of Hale's ranch hands. She'd seen him in town. He looked nervous, shifting his weight like the porch might collapse. Mr. Maddox, Mr. Hale sent me with a message. Deliver it. The hand swallowed. He says to tell you he's filing a new claim. Says your deed's invalid. Says there's evidence your father's original purchase was fraudulent and the land legally belongs to the Hale estate. Says you got 30 days to vacate or he'll have the sheriff remove you. The silence that followed was arctic. Tell Hale, Cole said, voice deadly calm, that I'll see him in hell first. The ranch hand practically ran to his horse. Cole closed the door and stood there, not moving, barely breathing. He's bluffing, Abigail said. He has to be. He can't just. He can if he has proof. Cole's hands clenched. If he found something, some document my father missed, some witness willing to testify, then we fight. We get a lawyer. We. With what money? Do you know what lawyers cost? What a court battle would cost? He laughed, a harsh sound. Hale's been planning this for years. He'll have everything documented, every argument prepared, and I'll have what? Books? Good intentions? You have me. He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. You have me, she repeated. I'm your wife. That has to count for something, legally, socially. It counts for nothing if we lose the land. His voice broke slightly. This ranch is all I have. It's all I've ever had that wasn't tainted by him. And now, Abigail made a decision. She crossed the room and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Listen to me. We are not losing this ranch. We are not giving Hale the satisfaction. We're going to fight him, and we're going to win. How? I don't know yet, but we will. She held his gaze. That's what partners do. They figure it out together. Something cracked in his expression. The walls he'd built so carefully started to crumble. I don't know how to do this, he said quietly. Partners. Together. I've been alone so long. Then we'll learn together. For a moment she thought he might pull away, might retreat behind those walls and shut her out. Instead, he leaned forward and rested his forehead against hers. Not a kiss. Something more honest than that. A surrender. They stood there in the lamplight, two people who'd married for survival discovering that maybe, possibly, they'd found something worth fighting for. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the darkness, Victor Hale was plotting their destruction. But for tonight, in this moment, they had each other. It would have to be enough. The morning after Hale's threat arrived, Abigail woke to find Cole already gone. His boots weren't by the door, his coat missing from the hook. The coffee pot sat cold on the stove. She dressed quickly and found him in the barn, mucking stalls with the kind of violent energy that suggested he'd been at it for hours. His shirt was soaked with sweat despite the December cold. You didn't sleep, she said. Didn't see the point. He didn't stop working. Sleep won't change the situation. Neither will destroying yourself. He finally looked at her, and the exhaustion in his face made her chest tighten. I keep thinking there has to be something I missed, some angle, some defense, but I go through it all and I keep coming back to the same conclusion. My father was a thief, and Hale knows it. Abigail stepped into the stall, ignoring the smell and the muck. Tell me everything, every detail of how your father got this land. What good will that tell me? So he did. The story spilled out in fragments. His father, Samuel Maddox, had arrived in Wyoming in 1855 with nothing but ambition and a talent for finding weaknesses. The Hale family, Victor's grandfather, then his father, had owned a prosperous ranch, well-watered and strategically positioned. Samuel had worked for them initially, learning the operation, earning trust. Then came the scheme. He forged a debt, Cole said flatly. Made it look like the elder Hale had borrowed money from a bank in Denver. Created documentation, bribed a clerk, even manufactured correspondence. When he called in the debt, the Hales couldn't pay. The ranch went to auction. My father was the only bidder. But surely someone investigated. Who? The nearest federal marshal was 200 miles away. The local authorities were whoever had the most guns and money. By the time anyone questioned it, my father had the deed, and the Hales were ruined. He threw the pitchfork aside. Victor's grandfather died within a year. His father took to drink, like I said. Victor himself was just a boy, but he remembered. He's been waiting for this his whole life. Abigail processed this. Where's the proof? Of the forgery, I mean. If you found those documents, they're detailed enough to prove fraud, but vague enough that destroying them wouldn't help. Hale could still make his case based on inconsistencies in the original transaction. And if he's found witnesses, people who knew my father, who saw what happened. He shook his head. I'm fighting ghosts. Then we need to become real, Abigail said suddenly. What? Our marriage. Right now it's just paper. But if we make it convincing, if the whole county believes we're genuinely building a life here, raising a family, it becomes harder to claim you're a temporary obstacle. Families have permanence. They have community standing. Cole stared at her. You want to pretend? I want to fight. She stepped closer. You said Hale's been planning this for years. Fine. But he planned for the Cole Maddox who was alone, isolated, easy to vilify as Samuel's son. He didn't plan for us. Us, Cole repeated, like testing the word. Partnership. That's what we agreed to. She held his gaze. Let's make him see it. The shift started small. That Sunday, they attended church together for the first time. Cole had avoided it since their marriage, claiming ranch work. But now he sat beside Abigail in the third pew, hand resting on the small of her back as they stood for hymns. The touch was light, respectful, but visible. The congregation noticed. After the service, they lingered instead of fleeing. Cole introduced Abigail to ranchers he'd barely spoken to in years. She charmed the minister's wife with a discussion about educational reforms. They accepted an invitation to Sunday dinner at the Hendricks farm, the family whose boy Abigail still sometimes fed. "You're good at this," Cole murmured as they drove home that evening. "At what?" "Being a wife. The convincing kind." Something in his tone made her look at him. "It's not entirely an act." He didn't respond, but his hands tightened on the reins. The town started talking, but this time the gossip worked in their favor. The spinster and the hermit, people said, had turned out to be a surprisingly solid match. Mrs. Maddox had softened her husband's rough edges. Mr. Maddox had given his wife security and purpose. They were seen together at the mercantile, the feed store, the post office. Small touches, casual conversation, the easy shorthand of couples who knew each other. None of it felt entirely false anymore, which terrified Abigail more than she wanted to admit. 2 weeks after Hale's threat, the invitation arrived. It was printed on expensive paper, delivered by a boy who waited for a response. Victor Hale requested the pleasure of their company at his annual New Year's dinner, formal attire. 8 o'clock. Regrets not accepted. "It's a trap," Cole said immediately. "Of course it is." Abigail studied the invitation. "But refusing would look weak, like we're afraid." "We should be afraid. Hale doesn't do anything without 3 layers of strategy." "Then we'll have 4. She met his eyes. "We accept. We go. We show him that we're united and unshakable." "You don't know him like I do." "And he doesn't know me at all." She smiled, though it felt sharp. "That's our advantage." Cole looked like he wanted to argue, but finally nodded. "Fine, but you stay close to me, the entire time." The problem, Abigail discovered 3 days before the dinner, was that she had nothing to wear. Her dresses were practical, teaching dresses, church dresses, nothing remotely appropriate for formal dinner at the county's wealthiest estate. Cole found her staring at her wardrobe with increasing frustration. "What's wrong? I can't go like this." She gestured at her limited options. "Hale will use it against us. Poor Cole Maddox can't even dress his wife properly." "That's ridiculous." "Is it? You said he looks for weaknesses." "Well, showing up looking like a schoolmarm at a cattle auction would be broadcasting one." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled money from his pocket, more money than she'd seen him carry. "Go to town, buy what you need." "Cole, I can't." "Yes, you can. We're supposed to be convincing, remember?" He pressed the bills into her hand. "Make Hale see what he's up against." The dressmaker in town, Mrs. Chen, had exactly one formal gown available. A deep green silk that another customer had ordered, then abandoned. It fit Abigail almost perfectly with minor alterations. "You'll be the most beautiful woman there," Mrs. Chen said, pinning the hem. Abigail doubted that, but when she saw herself in the mirror, the way the color brought out her eyes, the way the cut flattered instead of hid, she felt something unfamiliar. Not quite confidence, but its shadow. Cole's reaction when she descended the stairs New Year's Eve confirmed it. He'd been adjusting his tie. He owned exactly one formal suit, rarely worn, but stopped mid-motion when he saw her. Just stopped and stared. "Is it too much?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "No." His voice was rough. "It's perfect." The drive to Hale's estate took 40 minutes. Neither of them spoke much, tension coiling tighter with each mile. Cole's jaw was set, his hands white-knuckled on the reins. Abigail kept smoothing her skirt, a nervous habit she couldn't break. "Remember," Cole said as the house came into view, "we're a united front. Whatever he says, whatever he implies, we don't break, I know." Hale's home was massive, a monument to wealth and power that dwarfed every other structure in the county. Light blazed from every window. Carriages lined the drive. Music and laughter drifted through the cold air. A servant took their coats. Another directed them to the receiving line. Victor Hale stood at the center of his domain like a king holding court. He was dressed impeccably, silver hair gleaming, smile wide and welcoming. Everything about him screamed refined civilization, which made him more dangerous, not less. Mr. and Mrs. Maddox. He clasped Cole's hand with theatrical warmth. I'm delighted you could make it. And Mrs. Maddox. He took Abigail's hand, holding it a fraction too long. You are radiant. Matrimony clearly agrees with you. Mr. Hale. Abigail extracted her hand smoothly. Thank you for the invitation. I wouldn't dream of celebrating without you. After all, we're neighbors. Practically family. His eyes slid to Cole. Though I suppose that's a complicated word these days, isn't it? Family? Not particularly, Cole said evenly. No? I would have thought, given recent developments, family ties might feel rather tenuous. Hale's smile never wavered. But perhaps I'm mistaken. You two certainly seem devoted. The implication hung there, poisonous. Devotion comes easily when you've chosen well, Abigail said before Cole could respond. My husband is a man of integrity. It makes everything else quite simple. Hale's eyes sharpened with interest. Integrity? What a quaint notion. I prefer effectiveness myself. He gestured toward the dining room. Please, enjoy the evening. We'll have plenty of time to talk later. It was a dismissal and a threat. The dinner was elaborate. 7 courses, fine wine, conversation that sparkled with intelligence and underlying cruelty. Abigail found herself seated between a banker's wife and a cattle baron, both of whom seemed more interested in probing her background than making genuine conversation. Boston, you said? The banker's wife, Mrs. Hartford, asked. How cosmopolitan. Whatever brought you to Wyoming? Adventure, Abigail replied smoothly. I wanted to experience the frontier. And you certainly got that, didn't you? The woman's laugh was like broken glass. Marrying Cole Maddox, so sudden, so unexpected. Across the table, Cole was engaged in tense conversation with a lawyer Abigail recognized from town. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Love often is unexpected, Abigail said. That's what makes it real. Love. Mrs. Hartford savored the word. How romantic. Though I must say some of us wondered if it was more practical. A schoolteacher's salary is hardly adequate for Wyoming winters. The insult was delicate but unmistakable. I wonder, Abigail said, voice honey-sweet, if those who question others' motivations might be revealing their own. After all, those who marry for money often assume everyone else does the same. Mrs. Hartford's smile froze. The cattle baron beside Abigail choked on his wine, trying to hide a laugh. Score 1 for the schoolteacher. After dinner, the men retired to Hale's study for cigars and whiskey. The women gathered in the parlor for coffee and gossip. Abigail would have preferred to stay with Cole, but separation seemed to be the plan. Keep them divided, probe for weaknesses. She wouldn't give Hale the satisfaction. The women's conversation was predictably vicious. Thinly veiled comments about marriages, ranches, the financial stability of various families. Abigail navigated it with the same skills she used managing difficult parents at school board meetings. Smile, deflect, never show blood. Tell me, Mrs. Maddox, said a woman Abigail didn't know, older and sharp-eyed. How are you finding ranch life? So different from teaching, I imagine. Different, yes, but rewarding. Abigail sipped her coffee. There's satisfaction in building something lasting. Lasting? The woman exchanged glances with Mrs. Hartford. That's an interesting word choice, given the current uncertainty. Abigail's pulse quickened, but her expression stayed calm. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, just that we've all heard about the property dispute. Such a shame. Victor's been quite clear about his claim. The woman leaned forward conspiratorially. Between us, dear, you might want to start making contingency plans. It would be dreadful to be left with nothing when the courts decide. So that was it. Hale had planted the narrative already. The Maddox Ranch was doomed. The marriage a desperate gambit that wouldn't save them. How kind of you to be concerned, Abigail said. But my husband and I are quite secure in our position. Property disputes are common out here, I understand. They rarely amount to anything substantial. This one might be different. Might be, Abigail smiled. Or might not. Time will tell. More coffee? She changed the subject with surgical precision, and the conversation moved on, but the damage was done. Hale had spent the evening poisoning the well, making sure everyone knew the Maddox claim was questionable. When the men finally rejoined them, Cole looked like he'd survived a battle. He found Abigail immediately, his hand settling on her shoulder, a gesture that looked protective but felt like an anchor. "Ready to leave?" he asked quietly. More than. They made their excuses. Early morning, ranch duties. Hale saw them out personally, that insufferable smile still in place. "Thank you for coming," he said at the door. "I do hope we can do this again. Though, of course, circumstances change so quickly these days. One never knows what the future holds." "Indeed," Cole said tightly. "Oh, and Cole?" Hale's voice stopped them at the steps. "That matter we discussed? The documentation I mentioned? My lawyer will be filing formally next week. I thought you'd appreciate the warning. Professional courtesy between neighbors." Cole's entire body went rigid. "Of course, if you wanted to discuss a settlement, selling the property at a fair price, avoiding messy litigation, my door is always open, for now anyway." "Go to hell, Victor." "Already been. Found it rather less hospitable than Wyoming." Hale's smile widened. "Give my regards to your lovely wife. It would be a shame to see her dragged through the mud of your father's sins." The ride home was silent and furious. Cole drove too fast, the wagon rattling over frozen ruts. Abigail held on and waited. When they finally reached the ranch, he helped her down with mechanical courtesy and then stood there, shaking with rage. "He's going to do it," Cole said finally. "He's actually going to file, and there's nothing—" He slammed his fist against the wagon. 20 years? I've spent 20 years trying to be different from him, better than him, and it doesn't matter. I'm still going to lose everything because of what he did. Cole, you should leave." He wouldn't look at her. "While you still can. Before this destroys you too." Abigail stepped in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not leaving. You didn't sign up for this. I signed up for partnership. For better or worse, remember?" She gripped his arms. "We're going to fight this. Together." "How?" "You heard him. He's filing next week. He has lawyers, documentation, half the county already believing his version. Then we find our own proof. We dig up everything we can about your father's transaction. We find witnesses, records, anything that can counter his claim. There's nothing to find. I've looked." "You've looked alone." Her voice was fierce. "Now you have me. 2 sets of eyes, 2 minds. We start from the beginning and we don't stop until we find something." Cole stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're my husband." The words came out simpler than she intended. "Because this is my home now. Because I'm tired of men like Hale thinking they can take whatever they want." Something cracked in his expression, the last of his resistance crumbling. "I don't deserve you," he said quietly. "Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway." He pulled her close then, not quite an embrace, but something rawer. His forehead pressed against hers, breath harsh, body trembling with exhaustion and fear and something else she couldn't name. "Thank you," he whispered. They stood there in the cold, 2 people who'd started as strangers, holding each other against the dark. The next morning, they began the investigation. Abigail started with the town records, every document related to the Maddox and Hale properties she could find. Cole went through his father's papers again, looking for anything he might have missed. They worked separately through the day and compared notes at night, building a timeline of the fraud. It was damning. Samuel Maddox had been meticulous in his deception. The forged debt looked authentic, complete with stamps and signatures. The auction had been technically legal, witnessed and recorded. On paper, everything was legitimate. "That's the genius of it," Abigail said, spreading documents across the kitchen table. "He didn't forge the entire transaction. He just created one false document, the debt itself, and let the legal system do the rest." "So proving fraud means proving that specific document is fake," Cole said, "which we can't do without the original, which probably doesn't exist anymore. Unless someone kept records, the bank in Denver, closed 15 years ago. I checked." Abigail sat back, frustrated. "There has to be something, some inconsistency, some witness who remembers. Everyone who might remember is dead or paid off." Cole's voice was hollow. "My father made sure of that." They worked in defeated silence for a while. Then Abigail noticed something. "What's this?" She pointed to a notation on one of the auction documents. "It says the property description was amended post-sale." Why would that happen? Cole leaned over. I never noticed that before. It's subtle. But look, the boundary description changed slightly. Added a section about water rights that wasn't in the original filing. Meaning what? Meaning maybe your father didn't just steal the ranch? Maybe he stole more than the official records show. Her mind was racing now. If he amended the property description after the fact, added land that wasn't part of the original auction, that's a different kind of fraud. One we might be able to prove. Cole was catching on. If we can find the original survey, compare it to the amended version, we show a pattern of deception that calls the entire transaction into question. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next week, they pursued every lead. Cole rode to the county seat to search survey records. Abigail interviewed old-timers in town, anyone who might remember the original property lines. They worked separately, efficiently, like soldiers executing a campaign. But the evenings were different. They'd reconvene at the ranch, exhausted and often frustrated, and Abigail would cook while Cole built up the fire. They'd eat and strategize, but somewhere between dinner and sleep, something else happened. Conversations that drifted from legal strategy to books, from property disputes to personal histories. Cole told her about his mother, dead when he was 12, but present in every book on those shelves. Abigail told him about Boston, about James, about the humiliation that had driven her west. He didn't deserve you, Cole said when she finished. Neither did Boston. Wyoming does, though. He looked at her across the table. You're tougher than any of us. Smarter, too. Flattery won't... It's not flattery. It's fact. His expression was serious. When this is over, however it ends, I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made, even if it was for the wrong reasons. Abigail's breath caught. Cole, I mean it. You've given me something I didn't know I needed. Partnership, yes, but also, he struggled for words. Hope. The sense that maybe I'm not just my father's son, that I can build something real. She reached across the table and took his hand. You're not your father. You never were. How do you know? Because your father would have sold to Hale by now, taken the money and run. She squeezed his fingers. But you're still here. Still fighting. That's not Samuel Maddox. That's you. He turned her hand over, studying it like he'd never seen it before. Calloused from ranch work now. Not the soft teacher's hand she'd had 3 months ago. When this started, he said slowly, I told myself it was just practical. A business arrangement. But somewhere along the way, I know, she whispered. Me too. He looked up, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly broke her. I'm falling in love with you, he said. Raw, honest, terrified. I didn't plan to. I didn't want to. But I am. Abigail's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own response. That makes 2 of us. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like she'd imagined. Not soft or tentative. It was desperate and hungry. 3 months of tension finally breaking free. Cole stood, pulling her with him, and suddenly they were pressed together with nothing gentle about it. Upstairs, he breathed against her mouth. Yes. They barely made it to his room, clothes shed, hands exploring, mouths finding skin. It was frantic and messy, and absolutely nothing like the careful distance they'd maintained. Later, lying tangled in sheets with Cole's arm around her waist, Abigail felt something shift into place. This had stopped being pretend somewhere between Christmas and tonight, stopped being a contract and become something real. No regrets? Cole asked quietly. Only that we waited so long. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. Practical to the end. One of us has to be. They lay there in the dark, and for the first time since Hale's threat arrived, Abigail felt something besides fear. She felt ready. The morning brought clarity and urgency. Cole found the survey discrepancy. The original property description was 50 acres smaller than what Samuel had eventually claimed. The amendment had been filed 6 months after the auction, quietly, with minimal documentation. This is it, Abigail said, studying the papers. This proves he manipulated the records. It proves he amended a legal document, not necessarily that he did it fraudulently. But combined with everything else, the suspicious timing, the forged debt, the pattern of deception, it builds a case. Maybe, if we had a lawyer willing to take on Hale. That was the problem. Every lawyer in the county either worked for Hale or owed him money. Going to court meant finding outside representation, which meant money they didn't have and time they were running out of. Then we go public, Abigail said. We take this to the newspaper, to the community, make it so visible that Hale can't bury it. The newspaper's editor is in Hale's pocket, I know, but there's a territorial paper, and we have facts, documents. If we make enough noise, someone will listen. It was risky. Going public meant exposing everything. Samuel's fraud, their investigation, their precarious legal position, but staying silent meant letting Hale win by default. Together? Cole asked. Always? They spent the next 2 days preparing their case, organizing documents, crafting their statement. Abigail wrote it. Her teacher's training made her skilled at clear, persuasive arguments. Cole verified every fact, made sure every claim could be supported. On the third day, they rode to town together to send their story to the territorial newspaper. The editor at the local paper, Mr. Simmons, looked nervous when they walked in. Mr. and Mrs. Maddox, what can I do for you? We need to send a telegram, Abigail said, to the Territorial Gazette. Simmons paled. I'm not sure that's... Mr. Hale wouldn't appreciate... Mr. Hale doesn't own the telegraph lines, Cole said flatly. Yet. They sent the message along with a package of supporting documents. Then they waited. The response came faster than expected. The Gazette was interested, very interested. They were sending a reporter within the week to investigate. The editor's telegram was blunt. If half of what you claim is true, this is the biggest story in Wyoming. Word spread quickly. By evening, half the town knew the Maddoxes had gone to the territorial press. By morning, Hale knew. His response was immediate and vicious. 3 of his men showed up at the ranch at dawn, led by a foreman Abigail recognized from the New Year's party. They didn't dismount, just sat their horses at the edge of the property like a threat. Cole met them with his rifle visible, but not raised. Abigail stood beside him, her own weapon, the one he'd taught her to shoot, held with surprising steadiness. You're trespassing, Cole said. Mr. Hale sent us with a message, the foreman said. His name was Garrett, and his eyes were cold. He says you made a mistake going to the press. He says there are consequences for spreading lies. We haven't lied about anything. Mr. Hale says to tell you the sheriff will be serving eviction papers tomorrow. Says you've got 24 hours to clear out before he has you removed. On what authority? A court order. Judge Blackwell signed it this morning. Garrett's smile was unpleasant. Seems the evidence is pretty clear. The land's legally Hale property has been all along. Your father was a thief, and you're squatting on stolen ground. Cole's grip on the rifle tightened, but Abigail spoke first. Then we'll see him in court, with witnesses, documentation, and a territorial investigation backing our claim. Won't matter. Garrett shifted in his saddle. Judge is very clear. You're out tomorrow, one way or another. Tell Hale, Cole said, voice like iron, that he'll have to kill me to take this land. That can be arranged. The 3 men rode off, leaving dust and menace in their wake. Cole and Abigail stood in the yard, watching them disappear. He's forcing our hand, Abigail said, making us act before we're ready. Or he's scared. Cole lowered his rifle. We rattled him. That's why he's accelerating, which means we need to move faster. She turned to him. The reporter isn't coming for 5 more days. We need to stall somehow. We can't stall a court order. Then we fight it. We ride to the county seat, file our own motion, contest the eviction. With what lawyer? What money? Abigail's mind was racing. What if we don't need a lawyer? What if I represent us? Cole stared at her. You're not a lawyer. No, but I can read, I can argue, and I understand the law well enough to file basic motions. She was already planning. We file an emergency stay, claim the eviction is based on fraudulent evidence, demand a full hearing. It might not work, but it'll buy time. This is insane. You have a better idea? He didn't, which was how 6 hours later they found themselves at the county courthouse with Abigail drafting legal documents in handwriting that shook slightly but stayed legible. The clerk looked skeptical but accepted their filing. Judge Blackwell will review this in the morning. We need an emergency hearing, Abigail insisted. The eviction is scheduled for tomorrow. Then you should have thought of that before now. The clerk's tone suggested he knew exactly who they were fighting. The judge keeps regular hours, 9 a.m. tomorrow. It would have to be enough. They spent that night preparing. Abigail rehearsed her arguments while Cole gathered every document that might support their case. Neither of them slept. Neither mentioned the possibility that tomorrow might end with them homeless, their fight over before it truly began. At dawn, Abigail stood at the bedroom window, Cole's bedroom, their bedroom now, watching the sun rise over land they might lose by nightfall. Cole came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, "thank you for fighting, for staying. I'm not going anywhere." She leaned back against him. "We're in this together, remember?" "Together," he repeated. "I like the sound of that." They stood there as the light grew, two people who'd started as a transaction and become something neither had expected. Something worth fighting for. At 8:30, they headed to town for a hearing that would decide everything. And somewhere ahead, Victor Hale was waiting. The courthouse was already packed when they arrived. News traveled fast in a small county, and apparently the Maddox-Hale dispute had become the most entertaining thing to happen since the blizzard of '72. People lined the benches, crowded the doorway, craned their necks to see the parties involved. Victor Hale sat at the front with his lawyer, a slick man from Denver named Pemberton, who wore a suit that probably cost more than the Maddox Ranch earned in a year. Hale himself looked relaxed, confident, like a man watching a play whose ending he'd already written. He smiled when he saw Abigail and Cole enter. "Mrs. Maddox," he said pleasantly, "how brave of you to represent your husband, though I wonder if you fully understand what you're up against." "I understand perfectly, Mr. Hale." Abigail kept her voice level. "Which is why we're here." "Indeed." His eyes slid to Cole. "Last chance to settle this reasonably. Sell me the property at fair market value. Walk away with your dignity intact. Otherwise," he gestured to his lawyer. "Well, Mr. Pemberton is very thorough." "We're not selling," Cole said. "Pity." Hale's smile never wavered. "I did try." Judge Blackwell entered before anyone could respond. He was an older man, gray-bearded and stern, with the kind of face that suggested he'd seen everything and been impressed by none of it. He took his seat with deliberate slowness, surveyed the crowded courtroom, and banged his gavel once. "This is an emergency hearing on the matter of eviction notice served to Cole Maddox. I understand there's a motion to stay?" His eyes found Abigail. "Are you the petitioner, ma'am?" "I am, Your Honor. Abigail Maddox, representing my husband and myself." "You a lawyer, Mrs. Maddox?" "No, sir, but the law allows me to represent family members, and given the rushed nature of these proceedings, we had no time to secure outside counsel." Blackwell grunted. "Proceed. You have 10 minutes to state your case for why I shouldn't uphold this eviction." 10 minutes. Her hands were shaking as she stood, but her voice came out steady. "Your Honor, this eviction is based on fraudulent claims to property that has been in the Maddox family for 70 years. Mr. Hale alleges that the original sale was invalid, but his evidence relies on documents that are themselves suspect. We've uncovered proof that the property boundaries were illegally amended after the initial purchase, suggesting a pattern of deception that calls the entire transaction into question. Do you have this proof with you?" "Yes, Your Honor." She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. Blackwell studied them for a long moment. Too long. Abigail's pulse hammered in her throat. "These are survey records," he said finally. "They show an amendment to property description. That's not illegal, Mrs. Maddox. Property lines get adjusted all the time. But this adjustment added 50 acres that weren't part of the original auction, land that legally belonged to the Hale family estate at the time." "So you're claiming theft?" "I'm claiming that the amendment was made without proper legal authority and that it demonstrates a pattern of fraudulent activity by the original purchaser, Samuel Maddox." Pemberton stood smoothly. "Your Honor, if I may, Mrs. Maddox is essentially arguing that her husband's own father was a criminal. She's undermining her own case." "I'm arguing," Abigail said sharply, "that crimes committed 70 years ago don't justify theft today. My husband inherited land legally. He's improved it, paid taxes on it, operated within the law. Mr. Hale's claim is that historical fraud invalidates current ownership, but if that standard applied universally, half the properties in Wyoming would be in dispute. The difference," Pemberton said, "is that we have documented proof. The original debt that precipitated the sale was forged. We have testimony from descendants of witnesses who saw Samuel Maddox bribe clerks, falsify records. Hearsay and speculation. If I may finish, Mrs. Maddox. Pemberton's tone was condescending. We have solid evidence that the Maddox claim to this property is built on fraud. The eviction is legally justified. Then let's have a full trial, Abigail shot back. A proper hearing where both sides can present evidence, call witnesses, examine the documents thoroughly. This rush to eviction suggests Mr. Hale is afraid of what a real investigation might reveal. Or, Hale said from his seat, voice carrying across the courtroom, it suggests that justice delayed is justice denied. I've waited 20 years for the law to recognize what everyone knows, that the Maddox family stole my inheritance. I won't wait any longer. The courtroom murmured. Blackwell banged his gavel. Enough, Mrs. Maddox. Your motion for a stay is denied. The eviction will proceed as scheduled. Abigail felt the floor drop out from under her. Your Honor, please. We need time to prepare a defense, to gather— You've had 70 years, ma'am. That's time enough. Blackwell's expression wasn't unkind, but it was final. The property will revert to Mr. Hale's ownership effective immediately. You have until sunset tomorrow to vacate. This is not justice. This is the law, and I suggest you follow it, Mrs. Maddox, before you find yourself in contempt. He stood. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell like a death sentence. Abigail stood frozen as the courtroom erupted in noise. People talking, arguing, speculating. Hale was already shaking hands with Pemberton, accepting congratulations. And Cole looked like he'd been shot. We need to go, he said quietly, taking her arm. They pushed through the crowd and out into the cold January air. Abigail couldn't feel her hands, couldn't feel anything except the crushing weight of failure. I'm sorry, she whispered. I thought if I could just make him listen, it wouldn't have mattered. Cole's voice was hollow. Blackwell was always going to rule for Hale, I knew that. I should have told you. Then why did we even try? Because you were right. We had to fight. He looked at her, and the devastation in his eyes made her chest ache. But we lost. They drove back to the ranch in silence. What was there to say? They had until sunset tomorrow to pack up their lives and leave. After that, the sheriff would come with Hale's men and physically remove them if necessary. Everything Cole had fought for, gone. The house felt different when they walked in. Already abandoned somehow. Already belonging to someone else. Abigail went straight to the kitchen and started pulling out crates. If they only had a day, they needed to use it. Pack what they could carry, sell what they couldn't, figure out where they'd even go. Cole disappeared into his study. She found him an hour later sitting at his father's desk with a bottle of whiskey and a revolver. Cole, I'm not going to use it. He didn't look up. Not on myself anyway, but I thought about it. For a minute there, I really thought about it. Abigail crossed the room and took the gun, placing it well out of reach. Then she sat beside him. We'll figure this out. How? We have no money, no home, nowhere to go. He laughed bitterly. You should have left when I told you to. Now you're tied to this disaster. I'm tied to you. There's a difference. Is there? He finally looked at her. I've destroyed your life, Abigail. You married me for security, and I couldn't even provide that. I married you because you asked. I stayed because I wanted to. She took his hands. And I'm not giving up just because a corrupt judge sided with a powerful man. There has to be another way. There isn't. I've been over it 1,000 times. Hale owns the law out here. He owns the judge, the sheriff, probably half the county. Fighting him in court is pointless. Then we don't fight him in court. The idea was forming even as she spoke. We fight him in the open. The territorial reporter is still coming. What if we refuse to leave? What if we make Hale physically remove us in front of witnesses and press? Cole stared at her. That's insane. You want to get us killed? I want to make it so public, so visible, that Hale can't hide behind legal documents. If he has to drag us out at gunpoint in front of a newspaper reporter, that's a different story than a quiet eviction. He'll do it anyway. Hale doesn't care about public opinion. Maybe not. But the territorial government might. Wyoming's trying to become a state. They can't afford scandals about powerful ranchers stealing land through corrupt courts. She was talking faster now, thinking it through. If we make enough noise, if we force them to pay attention, they'll watch us get evicted and write a sad story about it. Cole pulled away from her. I appreciate what you're trying to do, but it's over. We lost. No. Abigail stood, hands on her hips. I refuse to accept that. We didn't come this far just to give up because one judge sided with Hale. What else is there? We have no legal recourse, no money for appeals, no political connections. We have the truth. We have evidence. And we have a newspaper willing to listen. She started pacing. What if we gave them the whole story? Not just the land dispute, but everything. Your father's fraud, Hale's revenge, the corruption in the local courts. Make it so big they can't ignore it. That would destroy what's left of my family's name. Your family's name is already destroyed. Samuel did that himself. She stopped in front of him. But you're not Samuel, and maybe admitting what he did, owning it publicly, is the only way to move forward. Cole was quiet for a long time. Then he opened the desk drawer and pulled out a folded map. Remember when I told you about the documents? The ones my father kept? The ones that prove everything. If I give those to the reporter, there's no going back. Everyone will know what Samuel did, what he was. His hands trembled slightly. I've spent my whole life trying to distance myself from him, and this would tie me to him forever. Or it would prove you're nothing like him. Abigail knelt beside his chair. He hid the truth to protect himself. You'd be exposing it to pursue justice. That's the opposite of what he did. Hale would still win. The land would still be his. Maybe. But at least he'd have to claim it honestly, not through backdoor corruption. She took the map from his hands. And maybe, just maybe, if we make enough noise, someone in the territorial government will actually investigate. Force a real trial, one Hale can't control. It was a long shot. They both knew it. But it was the only shot they had left. Where are these documents? Abigail asked. In a cave, about 2 miles north, hidden in the rocks. Cole stood slowly. We'd have to go now, before Hale realizes we might have them. Then let's go. They rode out in the late afternoon, the sun already sinking toward the horizon. The cave was exactly where Cole said, tucked into a rocky outcropping, invisible unless you knew where to look. He crawled inside and emerged 10 minutes later with a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were documents that would change everything. Detailed records of Samuel's forgery, letters discussing the bribed clerks, even a confession of sorts, written late in his life, perhaps when guilt had finally caught up with him. It was all there, damning and complete. Why did he keep these? Abigail asked, scanning the papers by fading light. Guilt, maybe. Or insurance. Maybe he thought if the Hales ever came after him, he could use these to prove they were just as dirty. Cole's voice was flat. He was wrong. The Hales weren't dirty, they were just in the way. They rode back in darkness, carrying evidence that would destroy whatever remained of the Maddox reputation, but might buy them a chance at real justice. The reporter from the Territorial Gazette arrived the next morning, 3 days early and completely unexpected. His name was Daniel Ross, and he looked young, hungry, and deeply suspicious of everything. I heard there was an eviction happening, he said when Abigail opened the door. Figured I'd see it firsthand rather than wait for secondhand accounts. You're early. Good reporters usually are. He looked past her at Cole. You're Maddox? The one claiming Victor Hale is stealing your land? I'm claiming Hale is using corruption to take land that legally belongs to me. Cole stepped forward. And I have proof. Ross's eyes sharpened. What kind of proof? They spent the next 2 hours laying everything out. The survey discrepancies, the rushed eviction, the judge's connections to Hale. And finally, the documents from the cave, Samuel's entire scheme, documented in his own hand. Ross took notes furiously, occasionally stopping to verify details or ask pointed questions. When they finished, he sat back and let out a low whistle. This is bigger than a land dispute. This is a story about frontier corruption, generational revenge, and he looked at Cole. You realize this makes your father look like a monster, right? He was a monster. Cole's voice was steady. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. But you're his son. People will assume. Let them assume what they want. I know who I am. And I know that hiding the truth only gives men like Hale more power. Ross was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right, I'll write it. But I need to warn you, this is going to get ugly. Hale will retaliate. The people who owe him favors will close ranks. You might lose everything anyway. We already have, Abigail said. We've got nothing left to lose. Except each other, Cole added quietly, taking her hand. Ross looked between them, and something in his expression softened. How long you two been married? 3 months? And you're willing to go through all this together? Most couples would have cut their losses by now. We're not most couples, Abigail said simply. Ross smiled. No, I don't suppose you are. He gathered his notes. I'm going to file this story tonight. It should run in tomorrow's edition. After that, he shrugged. We'll see what happens. He left, taking their last hope with him. The sheriff arrived at 4 o'clock with Hale's men. 6 of them, all armed, all looking like they'd enjoy the excuse for violence. Sheriff Dunham himself looked uncomfortable, but that didn't stop him from unfolding the eviction order. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Maddox, I'm authorized to remove you from this property by force if necessary. I'd prefer it didn't come to that. We're not leaving, Cole said. Dunham sighed. I was afraid you'd say that. We have rights, Abigail said. You can't just throw us out. I have a court order that says otherwise, ma'am. Now you can walk out peacefully, or my men can carry you out. Your choice. Cole's hand moved toward his rifle. Abigail grabbed his arm. Don't. That's what they want. They're taking our home, and if you shoot them, they'll kill you and call it justified. She turned to Dunham. We'll leave, but I want it on record that this eviction is unjust and that we're filing formal complaints with the territorial government. File whatever you want, ma'am. Doesn't change the order. Dunham actually looked sympathetic. I'm sorry, but the law's the law. Whose law? Cole's voice was hard. Hale's? The court's. Now please, don't make this harder than it needs to be. They walked out of their home carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs and a single trunk of essentials. Cole had wanted to fight. Abigail saw it in every line of his body, but she'd convinced him that getting killed wouldn't help their cause. Hale was waiting outside, sitting his horse like a general surveying conquered territory. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Maddox, he tipped his hat. I want you to know this isn't personal. It's simply justice, long delayed. Justice, Cole repeated, the word like poison. You call this justice? I call it reclaiming what was stolen from my family. What your father took through fraud and deception. Hale's expression was calm, reasonable. You're not responsible for his sins, of course. That's why I'm being generous. There's a boarding house in town. I've arranged for you to stay there, at my expense, for 1 month while you get on your feet. We don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's closure. Hale turned his horse. I hope you'll come to see this as I do. The righting of an old wrong. Your father destroyed my family. I'm simply restoring balance. He rode away, leaving them standing in the yard of a home that was no longer theirs. Abigail felt Cole trembling beside her. Rage, grief, helplessness, everything he'd been holding back finally breaking through. We should have fought, he said. I should have. You'd be dead. She gripped his hand tightly. And I'd be alone. This isn't over, Cole. It's just beginning. How can you say that? We lost everything. We lost a building. We didn't lose us. She turned to face him. Hale thinks he won. But that reporter has the whole story now. Tomorrow the entire territory will know what your father did and what Hale's doing. That has to count for something. And if it doesn't, then we start over. Somewhere else, somehow else. She pulled him close. But together. That was the agreement, remember? For better or worse. Cole buried his face in her shoulder, and she felt the shudder run through him. Not quite crying, but close. The collapse of a man who'd held on too long, fought too hard, and finally ran out of strength. They stood there as Hale's men began moving through the house, claiming it, transforming it from a home into just another piece of property. The boarding house was small and depressing. Thin walls, narrow beds, the smell of boiled cabbage permeating everything. Their room had space for the trunk and not much else. After the ranch, it felt like a coffin. But they were together. That night, lying on a mattress that sagged in the middle, listening to sounds from other rooms, Cole finally spoke. I failed you. No. Abigail rolled to face him in the darkness. You fought. That's all anyone can do. I promised you security. You gave me partnership. That's worth more. She found his hand, laced their fingers together. We'll get through this. How? The same way we've gotten through everything else. One day at a time, together. He pulled her close, and they lay there in the dark. Two people who'd lost everything except each other. The newspaper hit town like a bomb. Ross's story ran on the front page of the Territorial Gazette, and he'd held nothing back. Every detail of Samuel's fraud, every connection between Hale and the local courts, every piece of evidence Abigail and Cole had gathered. The headline read, "Frontier Justice or Corruption? The Maddox-Hale Land War Exposed." Within hours, copies were circulating through town. By afternoon, people were arguing about it in the streets. Some sided with Hale. Samuel had been a criminal, after all, and his son had benefited from those crimes. Others questioned whether generational revenge constituted justice or just more theft. But everyone was talking. Abigail and Cole stayed in their room, reading and rereading the article. Ross had been fair, presenting both sides, but the implication was clear. Something was rotten in Wyoming's legal system, and the Maddox case was proof. "It's not enough," Cole said. "People talking doesn't change the eviction. Maybe not directly, but look." Abigail pointed to a paragraph near the end. Ross contacted the territorial governor's office. "They're saying they'll investigate if there's sufficient public pressure." That's political talk for probably nothing will happen. Or it's an opening. She stood pacing the tiny room. "We need to push, write letters, contact other newspapers. Make enough noise that they can't ignore us. Abigail, we're living in a boarding house with borrowed money. We have no credibility, no resources. We have the truth, and we have each other." She stopped in front of him. "I know you're tired. I know this feels impossible. But if we give up now, Hale wins completely. Is that what you want?" "Of course not. Then we keep fighting." A knock at the door interrupted them. Abigail opened it to find a woman she didn't recognize, middle-aged, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that took in everything. "Mrs. Maddox? My name is Elizabeth Thornton. I'm an attorney from Denver." Abigail's heart skipped. "We can't afford—" "I'm not here for payment. I'm here because I read Daniel Ross's article, and I think you have a case." She stepped inside without being invited. A case that could set precedent across the territory. "May I sit?" They spent the next hour discussing everything, the evidence, the eviction, the corruption. Thornton asked sharp questions, took meticulous notes, and occasionally smiled in a way that suggested she saw angles they'd missed. "Here's what I think," she said finally. "You can't win on the original land claim. Samuel's fraud is too well documented, and legally, stolen property should revert to its rightful owners, but—" She held up a hand as Cole started to protest. "The eviction process was rushed and improper. Judge Blackwell didn't allow adequate time for defense, didn't permit full presentation of evidence. That's grounds for appeal." "We already lost the appeal." "You lost a motion for stay. That's different from appealing the eviction itself." Thornton pulled out documents from her bag. "I can file this in territorial court. It'll take months to resolve, but it freezes the eviction in the meantime. You'd be able to return to the ranch while the case is pending." Abigail and Cole exchanged looks. "Why would you do this?" Cole asked. "If we can't pay you—" "A, because I'm tired of seeing powerful men manipulate the law to serve their interests. And because this case, if we win, establishes important precedent about proper judicial procedure." Thornton's smile was sharp. "Also, I loathe Victor Hale. He tried to ruin my father 15 years ago. This would be satisfying." "So it's revenge," Cole said. "It's justice. There's a difference." She stood. "I'll need you to sign these documents, and I'll need access to all your evidence. If we're going to do this, we do it properly." They signed. What choice did they have? 3 days later, Thornton filed the appeal. The response was immediate and vicious. Hale's lawyers descended on the territorial court with motions to dismiss, claims of harassment, demands for sanctions. But Thornton held firm, and the territorial judge, one Hale didn't control, agreed to hear the case. The eviction was frozen pending appeal. They could go home. The ranch looked different when they returned. Hale's men had cleared out their personal belongings, rearranged furniture, made it clear that even if they could return, it was on borrowed time. But it was still their home, and walking back through that door felt like a victory. Small, temporary, but real. "We're not out of this yet," Cole said, looking around at the disrupted rooms. "I know, but we're still in the fight." Abigail started putting things back in place. That's something. They spent the next week restoring order and preparing for the appeal. Thornton visited regularly, coaching them on testimony, identifying weak points in Hale's case, building their defense piece by piece. But Hale wasn't idle. The rumors started subtly. Whispers that Abigail had seduced Cole for his land. Suggestions that their marriage was a sham designed to complicate Hale's legitimate claim. Questions about Cole's mental state. Was he stable? Rational? Or was he so obsessed with keeping stolen land that he dragged an innocent woman into his delusion? The attacks were calculated, designed to undermine their credibility before the appeal was even heard. Then things escalated. One morning, they found 2 of their cattle dead, throats cut, left to rot in the north pasture. The message was clear. Hale could destroy more than just their legal case. Cole wanted to ride to Hale's estate and settle it with bullets. Abigail stopped him. That's what he wants. An excuse to claim you're violent, unstable, dangerous. We can't give him that. So we just let him kill our livestock. We document it. We report it. We add it to the pattern of harassment. She was already writing down details. Every crime he commits is more evidence of his character. Evidence nobody will care about. Evidence Thornton can use. Abigail kept writing. Trust the process, Cole. Trust that the law can work if we give it enough ammunition. He hated it. She could see it in every line of his body. But he trusted her, which was enough. The harassment continued. Fences cut. Water sources fouled. Supplies ordered but never delivered. Paid for but mysteriously lost. Small acts of sabotage that added up to a clear campaign of intimidation. Through it all, Abigail documented everything, and Thornton built their case. The appeal hearing was set for late February, 6 weeks to prepare, to gather evidence, to steel themselves for a battle that would determine everything. They spent those weeks working harder than they ever had. Days were devoted to ranch work, repairing damage, tending animals, maintaining the property. Evenings were spent with Thornton, reviewing testimony, practicing responses, anticipating Hale's attacks. And nights were their own. In the darkness, in their bed, they found refuge. Not just physical comfort, though there was that, but emotional sanctuary. A place where they could admit their fears, share their doubts, shore up each other's resolve. What if we lose? Cole asked one night. Then we start over. Somewhere Hale can't reach. You'd leave Wyoming? After everything? I'd leave anywhere that didn't have you in it. She traced his face in the moonlight. The ranch is just land. Home is wherever we are together. He kissed her then, soft and desperate, and they made love like people stealing moments from an uncertain future. The night before the hearing, neither of them could sleep. They sat in the kitchen drinking coffee that was more ritual than necessity, watching the clock mark hours they couldn't get back. I'm scared, Abigail admitted finally. Me too. What if Thornton's wrong? What if the territorial court doesn't care about proper procedure or judicial corruption? What if they just see a thief's son trying to keep stolen land? Then they're wrong. Cole took her hand. But at least we'll know we fought, that we didn't just roll over and let Hale win. Is that enough? It has to be. He squeezed her fingers. Because it's all we've got. They sat there until dawn, 2 people facing an impossible fight, finding strength in each other's presence. When the sun finally rose, they were as ready as they'd ever be. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was grander than the county building, with marble floors and painted ceilings that suggested justice actually mattered here. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread, and this case had become something bigger than a land dispute. It was theater, drama, a referendum on frontier justice itself. Hale sat with Pemberton and 2 other lawyers, a show of force designed to intimidate. Thornton sat alone beside Abigail and Cole, looking completely unbothered. Judge Harrison entered, a stern-faced man in his 60s whose reputation for fairness had survived 2 decades on the territorial bench. He took his seat, reviewed the case files, and looked up with an expression that gave nothing away. This is an appeal of an eviction order issued by Judge Blackwell in Carbon County. The petitioners claim the eviction was improperly rushed and denied them adequate opportunity for defense. Is that correct, Ms. Thornton? It is, Your Honor. And you are opposing this appeal, Mr. Pemberton? We are, Your Honor. The eviction was entirely proper and based on clear evidence of fraudulent land acquisition. Then let's hear it. Ms. Thornton, you may present your case. What followed was 3 hours of meticulous legal argument. Thornton walked through every procedural error, every denied motion, every rushed decision. She presented the evidence Abigail and Cole had gathered, showed the pattern of corruption, demonstrated how Hale had manipulated the county courts. Pemberton countered with Samuel's documents, proof of forgery, testimony about the original theft. Back and forth, thrust and parry, two legal minds battling for advantage. But then Thornton changed tactics. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Victor Hale to testify." The courtroom erupted. Hale's lawyers objected strenuously, but Harrison allowed it, and suddenly Hale was on the stand under oath, facing questions he hadn't prepared for. "Mr. Hale," Thornton began, "how long have you known about Samuel Maddox's fraud?" "Since I was a boy. My father told me everything before he died." "And how long have you been planning to reclaim the land?" 20 years, give or take." 20 years, that's a long time. Thornton walked closer. "In those 20 years, did you ever attempt to resolve this through proper legal channels?" "I tried multiple times, but did you file suit?" "Not formally, no, but did you petition the territorial government for review?" "The territorial government wasn't—" "Answer the question, Mr. Hale. Did you petition for official review?" Hale's jaw tightened. "No. Instead, you waited, bided your time, built influence in the county, cultivated relationships with local officials. And then, when Cole Maddox inherited the land, you struck. Is that accurate?" "I pursued legitimate legal remedies, through a judge you'd loaned money to, using a sheriff who owed you favors, pushing through an eviction in record time without allowing proper defense." Thornton's voice was sharp now. "That's not legal remedy, Mr. Hale. That's revenge dressed up as justice." "Objection!" Pemberton was on his feet. "Counsel is making speeches, not asking questions." "Sustained. Ms. Thornton, stick to questions." But the damage was done. Thornton had planted the seed. Hale's pursuit wasn't about justice. It was about vengeance. The hearing ended with Harrison promising a decision within 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting, hoping, trying not to imagine what would happen if they lost. They returned to their ranch and threw themselves into work. It was easier than thinking, safer than hoping. Cole repaired fences that had been cut. Abigail tended livestock. They moved through days with mechanical precision, trying not to count down hours. The decision came on a Thursday. The letter arrived by courier, official seal intact. Abigail's hands shook as she opened it, Cole standing behind her reading over her shoulder. Judge Harrison had ruled in their favor. The eviction was overturned on procedural grounds. The case was being sent back to county court with orders for a full trial, proper discovery, adequate time for both sides to prepare. And crucially, it was being transferred to a different judge, one without financial ties to either party. They'd won. Not the war, but this battle. Abigail turned to Cole and saw tears on his face. "We did it," she whispered. "You did it." His voice broke. "I would have given up, but you kept fighting." "We kept fighting, together." They held each other in the kitchen, laughing and crying and trying to process what this meant. They still had to prove their case, still had to navigate a full trial, still had to convince a jury that they deserved to keep the land despite Samuel's crimes. But they had a chance, a real, genuine chance, and sometimes that was all you needed. Outside, the February wind howled across the plains, carrying with it the promise of spring and storms yet to come. The fight wasn't over. But for the first time since this whole ordeal began, Abigail believed they might actually win. The relief lasted exactly 3 days before reality set back in. They had won the procedural battle, but the war was far from over. The new trial date was set for late April, 2 months away, and Thornton made it clear that time was both their ally and their enemy. "Hale will use every minute to build his case," she said during her next visit, "and he'll escalate the harassment. Men like him don't take losses well." She was right. The first sign came a week after the ruling. Cole was in town buying supplies when he overheard a conversation at the feed store. Two ranchers he'd known for years, talking like he wasn't 10 feet away. "Maddox thinks he won something, but he's just delaying the inevitable. Should have taken Hale's settlement when he had the chance. Now he'll lose everything and look like a fool doing it. That wife of his heard she's the one pushing this. Probably figures she can get more money out of a trial." Cole's hands clenched around the bag of grain he was holding. Every instinct screamed to confront them, to defend Abigail, to make them take it back. But he remembered her words. Don't give them ammunition. He paid for his supplies and left without a word. But the poison was already spreading. Over the following weeks, the town's attitude shifted. People who'd been cautiously supportive grew distant. Invitations stopped coming. At church, other families left empty pews between themselves and the Maddoxes. The message was clear: pick a side, and most people were picking Hales. "They're afraid," Abigail said when Cole told her about it. "Hale's powerful. They don't want to be on his bad side. So they'd rather abandon us." Yes. She didn't sugarcoat it. That's how power works. It makes cowards of people who should know better. The isolation stung, but it also clarified things. They couldn't count on community support. Whatever happened at trial, they were on their own. Except they weren't. Not entirely. The first unexpected ally appeared in mid-March. His name was Thomas Brennan, and he'd worked for Samuel Maddox 30 years ago as a ranch hand. He showed up at their door unannounced, hat in hand, looking like a man who'd wrestled with conscience and lost. "I need to tell you something," he said to Cole. "Something about your father." They invited him in. Over coffee that went cold in his cup, Brennan told a story that made Cole's face go pale. "Your father didn't act alone. The forgery, the bribed clerks, there was someone else involved. Someone who helped plan the whole thing." "Who?" Abigail asked. Brennan looked miserable. "Victor Hale's uncle, Marcus Hale." The silence that followed was absolute. "You're saying Hale's own family helped steal their land?" Cole's voice was dangerous. "Marcus was the black sheep. Gambled, drank, always in debt. Samuel approached him with a deal, help with the forgery, and he'd get a cut of the profits. Marcus agreed. But after it was done, Samuel cut him out. Paid him a fraction of what was promised, then threatened to expose him if he complained." "Why are you telling us this now?" Abigail asked. "Because I'm dying. Cancer. Got maybe 6 months." Brennan met her eyes. "I've carried this secret for 3 decades. Watched the Hale family blame Samuel for everything when one of their own was just as guilty. Watched Victor spend his life plotting revenge for something his uncle helped cause." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "I don't want to die knowing I kept silent." "Will you testify?" Cole asked. "That's why I'm here." Thornton was skeptical when they told her. A deathbed confession from someone who worked for the accused? Hale's lawyers will tear him apart, claim he's bitter, senile, trying to get revenge for some old grudge. "But it's the truth," Abigail insisted. "The truth is less important than what we can prove." Thornton tapped her pen against her notebook. "Still, it's better than nothing. If we can corroborate his story, find records of Marcus Hale's debts, link him to the clerks who were bribed, it might be enough to muddy the waters." Muddy the waters? Introduce reasonable doubt about Hale's claim to moral high ground. If his own family was complicit in the theft, it undermines his entire narrative. She looked at them seriously. "It won't win the case outright. Samuel still committed fraud, but it might make a jury question whether Victor deserves to benefit from a scheme his uncle helped execute." It was something. Another piece on the board. They spent the next 2 weeks chasing leads. Abigail combed through old newspaper archives, looking for mentions of Marcus Hale. Cole tracked down former gambling associates, men who might remember Marcus's sudden influx of cash around the time of the land sale. The work was exhausting and often fruitless, but slowly, painfully, they assembled a picture of Marcus Hale as a desperate man who'd sold out his own family for money he never really got. Then Hale made his countermove. The lawsuit arrived via courier. Victor Hale was suing Cole for defamation, claiming the accusations made in the Territorial Gazette had damaged his reputation and business. He was seeking $50,000 in damages, more money than the ranch would bring at auction. "It's intimidation," Thornton said when she reviewed the filing. "He's trying to bury you in legal costs, force you to settle the land dispute just to make the defamation suit go away." "Can he do that?" Abigail asked. "He already has. We'll have to defend both cases simultaneously." She looked exhausted. "I'm good, but I can't be in 2 courtrooms at once. You'll need additional counsel for the defamation defense." "We can't afford—" "I know." Thornton rubbed her temples. "Let me make some calls. There might be someone willing to work pro bono, especially given the publicity this case is getting." That night, Cole and Abigail sat in their bedroom, reviewing finances that didn't add up no matter how they calculated. "We're going to lose," Cole said flatly. "Not because we're wrong, but because we'll run out of money before we run out of legal battles." "Maybe." Abigail refused to give in to despair. "Or maybe Hale's overreaching. Maybe he's so focused on destroying us that he'll make a mistake." That's not a strategy. It's hope, which is all we have right now. She took his hands. I know this is hard. I know it feels impossible. But we've come too far to quit now. Cole pulled her close, and they sat there in the lamplight, two people trying to convince themselves they could survive what was coming. The harassment escalated again. Someone set fire to their hay barn. It was a small blaze, caught early, but the message was clear. Then their well was poisoned, not enough to kill, but enough to make the water undrinkable for a week. Supplies continued to go missing. Fences were cut faster than they could repair them. The sheriff did nothing. When they filed complaints, he took statements with obvious reluctance and promised to investigate, but nothing ever came of it. We could set up watch, Cole suggested, catch them in the act. And then what? We're outnumbered and outgunned. Abigail was checking the water again, testing it for contamination. They want us to retaliate, give them an excuse to claim we're the aggressors. So we just take it? We survive it, and we document every single incident for trial. But surviving was getting harder. In early April, Abigail discovered she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, the nausea, the exhaustion that went beyond simple stress. But confronting it, holding the reality of it, changed everything. She told Cole that evening, blurting it out over dinner without preamble. I'm pregnant. He dropped his fork, just stared at her, mouth open, clearly trying to process. Say something, she said. Are you sure? As sure as I can be without a doctor, which we can't afford right now, but yes, I'm sure. Cole stood slowly, crossed to her side of the table, and knelt beside her chair. His hands found hers, trembling slightly. This is, his voice broke, this is everything, a family, an actual family. Cole, the timing is terrible. We're in the middle of 2 lawsuits. We might lose the ranch. We're barely surviving. I don't care. He pressed his forehead to her hands. This is the best news I've ever gotten. We're going to have a child. Abigail felt tears spilling over. What if we can't provide? What if we lose everything and we're raising a baby in that horrible boarding house? Then we'll figure it out, like we've figured out everything else. He looked up at her. Together, remember? She pulled him up and kissed him, tasting salt from both their tears. They held each other for a long time, 2 people choosing hope in the face of impossible odds. But the pregnancy changed the calculation. They weren't just fighting for themselves anymore. They were fighting for their child's future, for the legacy they'd leave behind. It made losing unthinkable. Thornton found them additional counsel, a young lawyer named Peter Walsh who'd just passed the bar and was hungry for high-profile cases. He took the defamation defense for a fraction of his usual rate, motivated more by idealism than money. Your case is exactly why I became a lawyer, he told them at their first meeting. Standing up to powerful men who abuse the system. It's textbook David versus Goliath. David had a sling, Cole pointed out. What do we have? The truth, and a jury that might actually care about it. Walsh spread out documents. Here's my strategy. We don't just defend against the defamation claim, we use it as a platform. Put Hale's entire campaign on trial. Show the jury that this lawsuit is part of a broader pattern of harassment and intimidation. It was aggressive, risky. But then again, playing it safe had gotten them nowhere. The trial for the land dispute was set for April 23rd. The defamation case would follow in May. 6 weeks to prepare for the fight that would determine everything. Abigail threw herself into preparation with obsessive focus. When she wasn't working with Thornton, she was researching precedents, organizing evidence, rehearsing testimony. The pregnancy exhausted her, but she pushed through, driven by something more than survival now. Cole worked the ranch and served as her sounding board, listening to her practice arguments, pointing out weaknesses, asking the hard questions. At night, they collapsed into bed and held each other, finding strength in physical closeness when words failed. 3 weeks before trial, Thomas Brennan died. The news hit them hard. Their star witness, the man who could corroborate Marcus Hale's involvement, was gone. Thornton had taken his deposition weeks earlier, thank goodness, but it wasn't the same as live testimony. Hale's lawyers will argue it's hearsay, Thornton said. Claim Brennan lied because he knew he wouldn't be around to face cross-examination. But we have the deposition, which I'll fight to get admitted. But it's not guaranteed. She looked tired. We're going to have to make our case without counting on Brennan. Treat him as supplemental, not central. It was another setback in a long line of them. That evening, Cole found Abigail in the library, surrounded by books and papers, crying quietly. "I can't do this," she said when he sat beside her. "I keep trying to find the angle, the argument that will win. But every time I think I have something, it falls apart. And now Brennan's dead, and we're back to just Samuel's documents and weak circumstantial evidence about Marcus Hale. Hey," Cole pulled her close, "you don't have to carry this alone." "But I'm the one who pushed us to fight. You would have walked away, taken the settlement, and regretted it for the rest of my life." He tilted her face up. "You gave me something worth fighting for. Not just the land. Us. Our family. The chance to build something that isn't tainted by my father's sins. What if we lose? Then we lose knowing we fought for what was right. That's more than most people can say." She leaned into him, exhausted and scared and trying to believe him. They sat there, surrounded by evidence that might not be enough, preparing for a trial they might not win, holding on to each other because it was all they had left. The week before trial, Hale played his final card. He offered a settlement, generous terms. Cole and Abigail could keep the house and 20 acres, enough for a small homestead. Hale would drop the defamation suit. They'd sign a non-disclosure agreement, never speak publicly about the case again, and acknowledge that the remaining land rightfully belonged to Hale. "Take it," Walsh urged. "It's better than you'll get at trial." But Thornton disagreed. "It's a trap. He's offering crumbs and counting on you being desperate enough to take them. But if you accept, you're admitting defeat, admitting Samuel's theft, validating everything Hale's claimed." "Which is true," Cole said quietly. "Samuel did steal the land, but Marcus Hale helped him do it, and Victor's using corruption and intimidation to claim it. Those truths matter too." Thornton's eyes were fierce. "If you settle now, you're saying those truths don't count. That power and money always win." Abigail placed a hand on her barely showing stomach. "What about the baby? If we lose at trial, we could end up with nothing. At least this way our child would have a home. A home built on surrender," Cole said. He looked at her. "Is that the lesson you want to teach our child? That when things get hard, you give up? That's not fair." "No, it's not. None of this is fair, but we get to choose how we respond to that." He turned to Thornton. "Reject the settlement. We're going to trial." Abigail wanted to argue, wanted to point out the insanity of risking everything on a trial they'd probably lose. But looking at Cole's face, the determination there, the refusal to compromise his integrity, even in the face of ruin, she knew he was right. "Reject it," she agreed. Walsh looked like he wanted to protest, but Thornton smiled grimly. "I'll inform Hale's counsel. This is going to make him very angry." "Good," Cole said. "Let him be angry. Maybe he'll make a mistake." The night before trial, neither of them could eat. They pushed food around their plates, made half-hearted conversation, and tried not to think about what tomorrow would bring. Finally, Abigail pushed her chair back. "I can't do this. I can't just sit here pretending everything's normal. What do you want to do?" "I want—" She stopped, thinking. "I want to walk the property, all of it. One last time in case—" She didn't finish. Didn't have to. They walked in the fading light, tracing the boundaries of land that might not be theirs much longer. Cole pointed out improvements he'd made. Fences repaired, irrigation ditches dug, pastures rotated. Evidence of 8 years of backbreaking work to build something better than what his father had left. "I thought I could redeem it," he said quietly. "The land, the name, all of it. Thought if I worked hard enough, was honest enough, it would somehow balance out what he did. It's not your job to redeem your father's sins." "Maybe not, but I wanted to anyway." He stopped at the highest point on the property, looking out over valleys painted gold by sunset. "This land, it's beautiful. Harsh, but beautiful. And I wanted to prove it could grow something good, despite everything." Abigail took his hand. "You did prove that. You built a life here, a real one with me. That's not nothing. It's everything." He pulled her close. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know, marrying you was the best thing I ever did. Even if I lose everything else, I'll still have that." "We'll still have each other," she corrected, "and our baby. That's more than your father ever had." They stood there as the sun disappeared, two people holding on to hope at the edge of darkness. The courtroom was packed when they arrived the next morning. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls, reporters with notebooks ready. This trial had become spectacle, entertainment, the kind of drama that broke the monotony of frontier life. Judge Morrison took his seat, a granite-faced man in his 50s whose reputation for harsh but fair rulings preceded him. He surveyed the crowd with obvious distaste. "This is a court of law, not a theater. Anyone who disrupts these proceedings will be removed." He turned to the lawyers. "Are both parties ready?" "Ready, Your Honor," Thornton said. "Ready," Pemberton echoed. "Then let's proceed. Ms. Thornton, call your first witness." The trial unfolded over 3 brutal days. Thornton presented their case methodically: the survey discrepancies, the rushed eviction, the harassment, and intimidation. She called witnesses who testified to Hale's influence over local officials, his campaign to destroy the Maddox's reputation, his refusal to pursue legitimate legal channels until he'd secured enough local power to guarantee victory. She introduced Brennan's deposition, fighting past Pemberton's objections to get it admitted. The testimony was damning. Marcus Hale's involvement, his cooperation with Samuel, his subsequent betrayal by the man he'd helped. But Pemberton countered with Samuel's own documents: the forged debt, the bribed clerks, the stolen land. He paraded witnesses who testified to Samuel's ruthless business practices, his willingness to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The sins of the father, Pemberton argued, cannot simply be ignored because the son is more sympathetic. This land was stolen. The rightful owners deserve restitution. On the second day, Cole took the stand. Pemberton went after him hard, trying to paint him as either complicit in his father's crimes or willfully blind to them. "You knew your father was dishonest, didn't you, Mr. Maddox?" "I knew he was ruthless. I didn't know about the forgery until after he died." "How convenient. And yet you continued to benefit from his crimes, didn't you? Living on stolen land, profiting from stolen wealth." "I worked that land, improved it, paid taxes on it. I didn't steal anything." "You inherited the proceeds of theft. That makes you complicit." "No." Cole's voice was steady. "It makes me my father's son. But I'm not my father. I've spent 8 years trying to prove that. By hiding the truth, by keeping those documents secret, by trying to build something honest on a foundation of lies." Cole looked directly at the jury. "I'm not proud of what my father did, but I won't apologize for trying to make it right the only way I knew how, by being better than he was." It was honest, raw, and Abigail could see it landing with at least some of the jurors. Then Pemberton changed tactics. "Tell me about your marriage, Mr. Maddox. How long have you been married?" Thornton objected immediately. "Relevance, Your Honor? I'm establishing timeline and motive," Pemberton said smoothly. "The court will see the relevance shortly." Morrison allowed it. 6 months, Cole said. 6 months. And you married rather suddenly, didn't you? After Mr. Hale first challenged your claim to the property? "We married because we wanted to. Or because you needed to appear more stable, more legitimate. A married man with a family is harder to evict than a bachelor. Isn't that right?" "That's not why. Isn't it true that your marriage was a tactical decision designed to complicate Mr. Hale's legal claim?" Cole's jaw tightened. "Our marriage is real." "Is it? Or is it simply another example of Maddox deception, marrying for convenience, using your wife as a shield?" "Objection!" Thornton was on her feet. "Counsel is badgering the witness and making accusations without evidence." "Sustained. Mr. Pemberton, ask questions or sit down." But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. Maybe the marriage was fake, just another scheme to keep stolen land. When Abigail took the stand later that day, Pemberton went for blood. "Mrs. Maddox, before you married, you were a school teacher, correct?" "Yes." "Making very little money, living in a rented room above a store?" "I was self-sufficient." "You were poor, struggling. And then Mr. Maddox proposed, offering you security, a home, status, everything you lacked. He offered me partnership." "Partnership. What a sanitized word for what was clearly a transactional arrangement." Pemberton's smile was sharp. "Tell me, did you love him when you married him?" Abigail hesitated. The truth was complicated, and she knew anything less than a simple answer would be used against her. "Answer the question, Mrs. Maddox. Did you love your husband on your wedding day?" "I respected him." "That's not what I asked." "No." The word came out hard. I didn't love him then. I barely knew him. The courtroom murmured. Pemberton pounced. So you married a man you didn't love for financial security, and now you expect this jury to believe your marriage is legitimate? It is legitimate. Love came later, but it's real. Or perhaps it's simply Stockholm Syndrome. You've convinced yourself you love him because the alternative, admitting you sold yourself for security, is too painful to accept. That's not true, isn't it? You went from poverty to relative wealth overnight. You have a home, status, purpose. Why wouldn't you fight to keep that regardless of whether the land was stolen? Abigail's hands clenched in her lap. Every instinct screamed to lash out, to defend herself and Cole and what they'd built. But she forced herself to stay calm. I'm fighting because it's right, because my husband deserves better than to be punished for his father's crimes, because the law should protect the innocent, not reward the vindictive. The law protects property rights, Mrs. Maddox, which your husband violated by continuing to occupy stolen land. The law also protects against corruption and abuse of power, which is what Mr. Hale has engaged in throughout this process. It went back and forth, each trying to score points, until Morrison finally intervened. That's enough. The witness may step down. Abigail returned to her seat feeling shredded. Cole took her hand, squeezed it hard. You did good, he whispered. She didn't feel like she had. On the third day, Hale himself testified. He was polished, sympathetic, the perfect victim. He spoke movingly about his father's ruin, his grandfather's death, the decades of injustice his family had endured. He positioned himself not as a vengeful heir, but as a seeker of justice, forced to extreme measures by a corrupt system that protected the powerful. It was a masterful performance. Thornton tried to crack him on cross-examination, pressing him on Marcus Hale's involvement, the bribed officials, the harassment campaign. But Hale deflected everything smoothly. I had no knowledge of my uncle's activities. If he was involved as Mr. Brennan claimed, he betrayed my family as much as Samuel Maddox did. Yet you're using your uncle's betrayal to claim land that's been in the Maddox family for 70 years? I'm claiming land that was stolen from my family. The fact that a member of my family may have been complicit doesn't change that fundamental theft. And the harassment? The poisoned well, the burned barn, the cut fences? I have no knowledge of any harassment. If someone is targeting the Maddoxes, it's not at my direction. Lies. But delivered with such conviction that even Abigail almost believed him. The closing arguments came on the afternoon of the third day. Pemberton spoke first, weaving a narrative of generational justice. Samuel had stolen, Cole had benefited, and now the scales must be balanced. The land belonged to the Hales, rightfully and legally. Then Thornton stood. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not about what happened 70 years ago. It's about what's happening now. Yes, Samuel Maddox committed fraud. That's not in dispute. But Cole Maddox is not his father. He's a man who's worked this land honorably for 8 years, who's tried to build something good from a flawed beginning. And Victor Hale, she turned to look at him. Victor Hale is using his father's tragedy as cover for his own campaign of revenge and corruption. He's not seeking justice. He's seeking vengeance. She spoke about the rushed eviction, the biased judge, the systematic harassment. She spoke about Marcus Hale's complicity, suggesting that if the Hale family benefited from Samuel's crime, they had no moral standing to claim the land now. This isn't about property rights, she concluded. It's about whether we're a society of laws or a society of power. Whether justice means fairness or simply revenge dressed in legal robes. I ask you to choose fairness. Choose the law over power. And let Cole Maddox keep the land he's earned through honest work. The jury retired to deliberate. Cole and Abigail waited in an empty courtroom, hands clasped, not speaking. There was nothing left to say. They'd done everything they could. Now it was out of their hands. The jury was out for 6 hours. When they finally returned, their faces gave nothing away. Morrison called the court to order, and the foreman stood to deliver the verdict. In the matter of Hale versus Maddox, how does the jury find? We find for the defendant, Cole Maddox. The courtroom exploded. Abigail couldn't breathe, couldn't process. They'd won. Against every odd, despite everything, they'd actually won. Cole pulled her into his arms, and she felt his whole body shaking. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. When the noise finally died down, he addressed the courtroom. The jury has found that while Samuel Maddox's acquisition of the land was fraudulent, Cole Maddox has operated in good faith, improved the property significantly, and should not be punished for his father's crimes. The land remains in Maddox ownership. Mr. Hale's claim is denied. He turned to Hale, whose face had gone white with rage. Mr. Hale, I would add that this court takes seriously the allegations of harassment and intimidation that emerged during this trial. If there is any retaliation against the Maddoxes, any further attempts to force them from their land through extralegal means, I will personally ensure that criminal charges are filed. Am I clear? Hale stood stiffly. Perfectly clear, Your Honor. Then this court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time, and it was over. They'd won. Thornton was grinning, accepting congratulations from Walsh and other lawyers. Reporters were already rushing out to file their stories. The crowd was slowly dispersing, talking animatedly about the verdict. And Cole and Abigail just held each other, unable to quite believe it was real. We did it, Cole whispered. We actually did it. We did it together, Abigail corrected, pulling back to look at him. Tears were streaming down both their faces. Like we said we would. I love you. He said it fiercely, desperately. I love you so much it terrifies me. Good. She kissed him. Because you're stuck with me now. For real. Forever. They left the courthouse together, stepping into afternoon sun that felt like blessing. The fight wasn't completely over. There was still the defamation suit, still the possibility of appeals, but they'd won the battle that mattered most. They'd kept their home. And more than that, they'd proven something Abigail had always believed but never quite trusted, that truth and courage could sometimes prevail over power and corruption. Not always, maybe not even usually, but sometimes. And sometimes was enough. The celebration was brief. They'd barely made it back to the ranch when reality reasserted itself in the form of Thornton's warning. Hale will appeal, she said, following them inside. And the defamation suit is still pending. Don't think for a second that this is finished. But for one night, they allowed themselves to believe it was. They opened a bottle of wine Cole's mother had saved for special occasions, dusty and probably past its prime, but perfect for the moment. They toasted to victory, to survival, to the sheer stubborn refusal to quit that had gotten them through. To us, Cole said, raising his glass. To actually being us, Abigail corrected. Not pretending, not performing, just being. They drank, and the wine tasted like hope. That night, lying in bed with Cole's hand resting on her stomach where their child grew, Abigail felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not complete, not permanent, but real enough to matter. What are you thinking? Cole asked. That I'm terrified this won't last. That we'll wake up tomorrow and it'll have been a dream. Me too. His thumb traced circles on her skin. But I'm also thinking that even if we lose everything else, we've already won the thing that matters most. Each other? Each other. He kissed her shoulder. And this little one. A family built on choice, not obligation. That's worth more than any amount of land. Abigail turned to face him. You really believe that? I do now. 6 months ago, I thought the ranch was everything. Losing it would have destroyed me. His eyes were serious. But you changed that. Made me realize that what I was really fighting for wasn't the land. It was the chance to build something that wasn't poisoned by my father's legacy. And we've done that. No matter what happens with appeals or lawsuits, we've already built it. She kissed him then, slow and deep, and they made love with a tenderness that felt like gratitude. For survival, for each other, for the impossible victory they'd somehow achieved. But morning brought complications. The first arrived in the form of a telegram from Walsh. Hale had dropped the defamation suit. No explanation, no conditions, just a terse notice of dismissal filed with the court. Why would he do that? Abigail asked, reading the message for the third time. Because he lost, Cole said. And pursuing it would just keep the story alive, keep people talking about how he tried to steal our land and failed. Or because he's planning something else. Abigail couldn't shake the suspicion. Men like Hale don't just give up. She was right. The second complication arrived that afternoon. Sheriff Dunham rode up, looking uncomfortable and apologetic. Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Maddox, I need to inform you that there's been a formal complaint filed regarding your cattle. Claim is they've been grazing on Hale property, causing damage. Cole's expression darkened. That's impossible. I know my property lines. My cattle haven't crossed them. Mr. Hale has survey evidence suggesting otherwise. New survey, commissioned last week. Dunham handed over documents. Shows the boundary line is about 100 yards different from what you've been using. Your cattle have been trespassing for months, apparently. Abigail scanned the papers. This is dated after the trial. He commissioned a new survey after he lost? Yes, ma'am, which is legal, if he has concerns about boundary accuracy. Concerns that conveniently emerged the day after we won in court. Cole's voice was hard. This is harassment, Sheriff, pure and simple. Maybe so, but it's legal harassment. He's got rights to verify boundaries. Dunham shifted uncomfortably. I'm required to inform you of the complaint. You'll need to respond formally, probably get your own survey done to contest his findings. Which will cost money we don't have, Abigail said. I'm sorry, ma'am, but that's the law. After Dunham left, Cole stood at the window, fists clenched, staring out at land they'd fought so hard to keep. He's going to bleed us dry with legal fees, death by 1,000 cuts. His voice was hollow. We won the battle, but we're still losing the war. Then we need to end the war. Abigail was already thinking, planning, not by fighting him on his terms, but by changing the game entirely. What are you talking about? What if we sell him part of the land? Cole turned, shock clear on his face. After everything we went through, hear me out. Not the ranch, not the house, not the core property, but the disputed boundary areas, the sections where his survey could legitimately create confusion. She was talking faster now, the idea crystallizing. We offer to sell him those sections at fair market value, eliminate the boundary disputes, remove his ammunition for future harassment. That's capitulation. No, it's strategy. We keep the heart of the ranch, the parts that matter. He gets to claim some kind of victory, save face. And both sides walk away with something instead of destroying each other over borders that probably should have been clarified 70 years ago. Cole was quiet for a long moment. You're suggesting we give him what he wants. I'm suggesting we give him what he needs, a way out that doesn't involve complete humiliation. Men like Hale are dangerous when they're cornered, but offer them an exit that preserves their pride, and sometimes they'll take it. And if he doesn't, then we're no worse off than we are now, but at least we tried diplomacy before resorting to endless legal warfare. It went against every instinct Cole had. After months of fighting, the idea of voluntarily giving Hale anything felt like betrayal. But Abigail's logic was sound, and more importantly, it offered something they desperately needed, a path to actual peace. I'll think about it, he said finally. The thinking took 2 days. 2 days of weighing options, consulting with Thornton, reviewing finances that showed just how precarious their position remained. The trial had drained their savings. Another extended legal battle would bankrupt them. On the third day, Cole made his decision. Contact Hale. See if he's willing to negotiate. Thornton did, and surprisingly, Hale agreed to a meeting. Neutral ground, the territorial courthouse in Cheyenne, with lawyers present. They met on a gray May morning, rain streaking the windows, tension thick enough to cut. Hale arrived with Pemberton and 2 associates. He looked older than at the trial, exhaustion showing around his eyes. The loss had cost him too, Abigail realized, not just legally, but personally. His crusade for revenge had consumed him for 20 years, and its failure had left him hollow. Mr. Maddox? Mrs. Maddox. His greeting was stiff but civil. Your lawyer suggested you had a proposal. Thornton laid out the offer. A detailed survey to definitively establish boundaries, followed by sale of the disputed sections to Hale at independently appraised value. All future legal action dropped on both sides. A formal agreement that this settlement resolved all claims related to the original property dispute. Hale listened without expression. When Thornton finished, he sat back in his chair. You're offering me crumbs. I'm offering you closure, Abigail said, by 20 years of fighting, Mr. Hale. 20 years of letting this consume you. Don't you want it to be over? What I want is justice for what your husband's father did to my family. My father's dead, Cole said quietly. He's been dead for 8 years. You can't punish him anymore, so you're punishing me instead. Is that really justice? You benefited from his crimes, and you're benefiting from the law's corruption. We can keep doing this until we're both destroyed, or we can accept that maybe, there's no perfect justice here. Just choices about how much damage we're willing to inflict pursuing it. The room fell silent. Rain drummed against the windows. Pemberton whispered something to Hale, who shook his head sharply. Finally, Hale spoke. I want double the disputed acreage, the boundary sections plus the north pasture. Thornton started to object, but Cole raised a hand. Why the north pasture? Because it's where my grandfather used to graze his cattle, before your father stole it. Hale's voice was controlled, but emotion leaked through. I want that back, not for practical reasons, for symbolic ones. Cole and Abigail exchanged looks. The north pasture was good land, but they could survive without it. More importantly, they understood what Hale was really asking for, something that felt like reclamation, not just compromise. Agreed, Cole said. But the appraised value stands. We're not giving it away. Fair market value, then. Hale stood, extending his hand. Do we have a deal? Cole hesitated only a moment before shaking. We have a deal. The formal agreement took another 2 weeks to finalize. Surveys, appraisals, legal documents so dense with language that Abigail's eyes crossed reading them. But on June 3rd, both parties signed, and it was done. They sold Hale roughly 300 acres for $12,000, enough to pay off their legal debts and have a cushion for the first time in months. The ranch was smaller, but it was indisputably theirs. No more challenges, no more disputes, just land they owned free and clear. The day after the sale closed, Abigail found Cole standing at the new boundary line, looking out over pasture that belonged to someone else now. Regrets? She asked. Some, but also relief. He turned to her. My father would have fought to the death rather than compromise, would have destroyed himself and everyone around him before giving an inch. But you're not your father. No. And maybe that's the real victory here, not keeping all the land but choosing a different path than he would have. Cole pulled her close. My father thought power meant never backing down, never compromising, but you taught me that real strength is knowing when to bend. I didn't teach you that. You figured it out yourself. With your help, he kissed her forehead. With our help. They stood there at the boundary, two people who'd learned that sometimes winning meant being willing to lose a little, that compromise wasn't weakness but wisdom, that the battles worth fighting weren't always the ones you could win completely. Life settled into new rhythms after that. The harassment stopped. Hale kept his distance, apparently satisfied with his symbolic victory. The community slowly warmed to them again, people who'd avoided them during the legal battles gradually reappearing with awkward apologies and invitations. Cole rebuilt relationships with neighboring ranchers, establishing the connections his father had burned. Abigail returned to teaching part-time, beloved by students who'd missed her sharp mind and gentle corrections. They worked the ranch together, making improvements, planning for a future that finally felt secure. And Abigail's pregnancy progressed. By July, she was showing clearly, moving with the careful waddle of a woman carrying new life. Cole became obsessively protective, insisting she rest more, work less, let him handle anything remotely strenuous. I'm pregnant, not dying, she protested when he tried to carry her up the stairs for the third time that week. Humor me. I've never done this before. Neither have I. We'll figure it out together. Together. I'm starting to like that word. Good. Because you're stuck hearing it for the next 50 years. The baby came in October, 3 weeks early and in the middle of a thunderstorm. Cole rode for the midwife while Abigail labored, gripping the bed frame and breathing through contractions that felt like being torn apart. Mrs. Chen arrived just in time, calm and efficient, guiding Abigail through the final brutal hours. Cole waited downstairs, pacing and useless, until the cry finally came. You have a daughter, Mrs. Chen called down. He took the stairs 3 at a time. Abigail lay exhausted in bed, hair matted with sweat, looking more beautiful than he'd ever seen her. And in her arms, wrapped in a blanket they'd bought months ago in a fit of hope, was their daughter. Tiny, perfect, alive. Do you want to hold her? Abigail asked. Cole approached like the baby might break, taking the small bundle with terrified reverence. She fit in his hands, this impossibly small person they'd created. Her eyes were closed, face scrunched, fingers curled into tiny fists. What do we name her? He whispered. They'd discussed names for months without deciding, but now, looking at this new life born from everything they'd survived, the answer was obvious. Hope, Abigail said. Her name is Hope. Cole started crying. He didn't mean to, hadn't expected it, but looking at his daughter, the emotion overwhelmed him. All the fear and pain and struggle of the past year crystallized into this single perfect moment. "Hope Maddox," he said through tears. "That's perfect." Mrs. Chen gave them privacy, and they sat together on the bed, Cole, Abigail, and baby Hope, a family forged through fire and choice and stubborn refusal to quit. "Thank you," Cole said. "For what?" "For this. For her. For fighting when I wanted to give up. For being stronger than I knew how to be." He looked at Abigail. "For choosing me, even when it made no sense to." "It made perfect sense," she corrected. "You just didn't see it yet." They stayed like that for hours, taking turns holding Hope, watching her sleep, marveling at the impossibility of her existence. This child, born into a story that started with a contract and became a love neither of them had planned for. Born into a home they'd fought to keep, on land that had cost them everything and given them more. Born into a legacy of mistakes and redemption, proof that the sins of fathers didn't have to define their sons. The months that followed were exhausting in entirely new ways. Hope was a terrible sleeper, waking every 2 hours demanding food and attention. Abigail was overwhelmed by the constant needs, the way her body wasn't entirely her own anymore. Cole stumbled through fatherhood with more enthusiasm than skill, making mistakes daily, but learning. But they did it together. When Abigail was too tired to function, Cole walked Hope through the house for hours, singing off-key lullabies his mother had taught him. When Cole panicked over every sneeze and hiccup, Abigail calmly talked him down, reminding him that babies were tougher than they looked. They learned to parent the way they'd learned everything else, through trial and error, supporting each other through failures, celebrating small victories. By Hope's first Christmas, they'd found their rhythm. The holiday was simple but joyful. A tree decorated with ornaments Hope would grab and try to eat, gifts that were more symbolic than expensive. A dinner shared with Thornton and Walsh, who'd become unlikely friends through their legal battles. "To the Maddox family," Thornton toasted, "who taught me that sometimes the good guys actually do win." "We didn't win," Cole corrected. "We survived. There's a difference." "Is there?" Walsh asked. "You kept your home, your family, your integrity. In my book, that's winning." Cole looked at Abigail, at Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, at the home they'd built from wreckage. "Yeah," he said finally. "I guess it is." Spring brought news that Victor Hale had died. Heart attack, sudden and fatal. He'd been found in his study, surrounded by papers related to the Maddox case, apparently still obsessing over the loss even months after the settlement. Cole and Abigail attended the funeral out of respect, standing at the back while the county's wealthy mourned a man they'd feared more than loved. Hale's children were there, 2 sons and a daughter, all grown, all looking more relieved than grief-stricken. After the service, the eldest son approached them. "Mr. Maddox." "Mrs. Maddox." He was younger than Cole, maybe 30, with his father's eyes but softer features. "I wanted to apologize for everything my father put you through. The harassment, the lawsuits. It was excessive, cruel even." "He thought he was pursuing justice," Abigail said gently. "He was pursuing revenge. There's a difference." The son glanced back at his siblings. "We've decided to sell most of the estate, including the land we bought from you. If you're interested in purchasing it back at the same price—" "No," Cole said, surprising himself. "But thank you for the offer." The son looked confused. "Are you sure? I thought—" "We've moved on. The ranch we have now is exactly the size we need. Adding more land would just be about pride, and I've learned that pride is expensive." Understanding dawned in the son's face. "You're wiser than your father. Wiser than mine, too." After he left, Abigail took Cole's hand. "You really don't want it back?" "I really don't. What we have is enough, more than enough." He looked at her. "Your husband's learning to be content with what he has instead of what he thinks he deserves." "My husband's learning wisdom. There's a difference." They left the funeral together, driving home through spring sunshine, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in a way that felt earned. That evening, putting Hope to bed, Abigail reflected on how far they'd come. A year ago, they'd been strangers bound by a contract. Now they were a family bound by love, tested by adversity, stronger for having survived it together. "What are you thinking?" Cole asked from the doorway. "That I'm grateful." "For what?" "For you asking me to marry you that day. For being desperate and practical enough to say yes. For every hard moment that brought us here." She looked down at Hope, whose tiny hand gripped her finger. "For all of it." Cole crossed the room and wrapped his arms around both of them. "Best business decision I ever made." "Terrible business decision. I've cost you a fortune in legal fees. Worth every penny." They stood there in the nursery, a family of 3, watching their daughter sleep and feeling lucky in ways that had nothing to do with money or land. The years that followed brought the normal rhythms of life. Hope grew into a bright, stubborn child who had her mother's mind and her father's determination. She learned to ride before she could properly walk, learned to read before she started school, learned that her parents' love was the foundation everything else was built on. Cole and Abigail grew older together, accumulating the small intimacies that defined long marriages. They knew each other's moods without speaking, finished each other's sentences, fought and made up, and learned that disagreement didn't mean the end of devotion. The ranch prospered modestly. They never became wealthy, but they were comfortable. More importantly, they were respected. Not for their land or money, but for their integrity. For how they'd faced adversity and chosen honor over convenience. When Hope was 5, she asked about the portrait of Samuel Maddox that hung in the library. "Who's that angry man?" "That's your grandfather," Cole said. "My father." "Why does he look so mean?" "Because he was mean. He did bad things to get the land we live on." Hope considered this seriously. "Did you do bad things too?" "No. But I benefited from what he did, which is almost as bad." Cole knelt to her level. "That's why it's important to make good choices, even when bad choices would be easier. Because our choices don't just affect us, they affect the people who come after us." "Like me?" "Exactly like you." Hope absorbed this with the gravity only children possess. "Then I'll make good choices, so the people after me aren't sad." Abigail, listening from the doorway, felt her eyes sting. This was what they'd fought for. Not just land or justice, but the chance to raise a child who understood that character mattered more than inheritance. On their 10th anniversary, Cole took Abigail back to the spot where they'd stood the night before their first trial. The boundary line was overgrown now, barely visible, the contested land long since sold and forgotten. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying me?" "Every single day," she said with a straight face. His expression crumbled before he realized she was joking. "I regret nothing," she amended, laughing. "Well, maybe your cooking, but nothing else." "My cooking's improved, marginally. You still burn water." He pulled her close, and they swayed together in the fading light, no music except the wind and their own heartbeats. "I love you, Abigail Maddox, more than I thought I was capable of loving anyone." "I love you too, even though you proposed to me like you were hiring a ranch hand." In my defense, I was terrified. Of me, of everything, of needing someone, of being vulnerable, of risking the little bit of security I'd built. He rested his forehead against hers. "But you made me brave. Made me believe that needing someone wasn't weakness." "It's not. It's just being human." They stood there as darkness fell, two people who'd learned that the strongest foundations were built not on certainty, but on choice. On choosing each other day after day through trials that would have broken weaker bonds. On choosing love even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. Years passed. Hope grew into a young woman who inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's fierce protection of those she loved. She went east for college, studying law with the intention of returning to fight the injustices she'd seen growing up. "I want to be like Thornton," she told her parents, "standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves." "Then do it better than we did," Abigail said. "Learn from our mistakes. Be wiser, kinder, more strategic." "But just as stubborn," Cole added. "Sometimes stubbornness is the only thing that works." Hope left for university with their blessings and a trunk full of books, leaving Cole and Abigail alone in a house that suddenly felt too large. They adapted, took long walks together, shared books and argued about them, worked the ranch side by side, comfortable in silence that only decades of marriage could create. And they told their story. When the territorial newspaper asked to do a feature on frontier marriages that had lasted, they agreed. The reporter was young, earnest, taking notes rapidly as Abigail explained how they'd met. So it was a marriage of convenience? The reporter asked. It started that way, Cole said. But it became something else. Something neither of us expected. What changed? Abigail and Cole looked at each other, a lifetime of shared experiences passing between them. We did, Abigail said finally. We stopped being two separate people trying to survive and became partners trying to build something. That's when it stopped being convenient and started being real. Any advice for young couples? The reporter asked. Cole thought about it. Choose each other, every day. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard because marriage isn't about the wedding or the romance. It's about the choice to keep showing up, keep fighting, keep loving, even when everything else falls apart. And sometimes, Abigail added, the best marriages aren't the ones that start with passion. They're the ones that build it through shared struggle, mutual respect, and the realization that you're better together than you ever were apart. The article ran the following week, their story told to a new generation as example and inspiration. On a cold December morning, 23 years after their unconventional wedding, Abigail woke to find Cole already up, standing at the bedroom window looking out over land they'd fought so hard to keep. What are you doing? She asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Thinking about my father. About how different my life could have been if I'd followed his path, refusing to compromise, destroying everyone who opposed me, dying alone and bitter. But you didn't follow his path. No, I followed yours. He turned to her and his eyes were bright. You taught me that strength isn't about refusing to bend. It's about knowing when to stand firm and when to adapt, when to fight and when to forgive, when to hold on and when to let go. I didn't teach you that. We learned it together. Together. He smiled. Still my favorite word. She crossed to him and he wrapped his arms around her, and they stood looking out at a ranch that was smaller than Samuel's had been but infinitely more valuable, because it was built on honesty, maintained through sacrifice, and passed down with integrity. This was the legacy they'd created, not land or wealth, but the example of two people who chose each other against odds, fought for what mattered, and built something lasting from the wreckage of the past. Hope would inherit this ranch someday, but more importantly, she'd inherit the lesson that redemption was possible, that change was achievable, that the mistakes of one generation didn't have to define the next, that sometimes the best thing you could do was choose differently than those who came before. That love, real love, the kind built on partnership and forged through adversity, was worth more than any amount of land. Do you think we did right by her? Cole asked. By hope? I think we showed her what matters. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not winning, but choosing to fight for things worth fighting for. Abigail leaned into him. She'll make her own choices. Some will be good, some will be mistakes. But she'll make them knowing that failure isn't fatal, and that getting back up is what defines character. That's all we can give her, isn't it? Examples and love and the freedom to choose her own path. It's everything. It's enough. They stood there as the sun rose, painting the frozen landscape in shades of gold and pink. The ranch looked different in morning light, softer, more forgiving, like the land itself had finally made peace with its complicated history. Somewhere out there, Victor Hale lay buried. His crusade for vengeance died with him. Samuel Maddox's sins had been acknowledged, their consequences accepted and addressed as best as possible. The debts of the past had been paid, not completely, but sufficiently. And here, in this house built on land that had cost them everything and given them more, two people who'd started as strangers stood together. Partners, lovers, parents, friends. A marriage of convenience that had become a marriage of choice, a contract that had transformed into covenant, a business arrangement that had bloomed into the kind of love that sustained and strengthened and simply endured. Not perfect. Never perfect, but real. And real, they'd learned, was better than any fiction they could have imagined. Cole? Abigail said quietly. Yeah? Ask me again. Ask you what? To marry you, like you did that first night. He smiled, understanding, turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. Abigail Maddox, will you marry me? What are the terms? Partnership, for better or worse, in sickness and health, through trials and triumphs, until death finally parts us. And separate rooms? She asked, echoing that first conversation. Absolutely not. I'm keeping you close for whatever time we have left. Then yes. She was crying now, happy tears. Yes, I'll marry you, again and again and again. He kissed her as the sun cleared the horizon, warming a world that had been cold too long. This was the story they'd tell Hope's children someday. Not about the legal battles or the land disputes, though those were part of it, but about two people who'd needed each other and eventually learned to love each other, who'd built a family from nothing but determination and hope, who'd proven that sometimes the most unconventional beginnings led to the most beautiful endings. Outside, the ranch waited, fences to mend, animals to tend, work that never truly ended. But inside this house, in this moment, there was only them. A man and woman who'd traveled an impossible distance from that first awkward proposal to this place of absolute certainty. Not perfect. Never perfect. But theirs. And that was more than enough. That was everything.